Claire Bennett had never cared much about birthdays. At 42, they felt less like celebrations and more like quiet reminders that another year had passed. She usually preferred a homemade dinner, a slice of chocolate cake, and a movie on the couch with her husband. Simple. Comfortable. That was enough. Or at least, it always had been. This year was different. Ethan insisted they go out. "It'll be nice," he'd said that morning while buttoning his shirt for work. "Thuff. Just us and Lily. You deserve something special." Claire smiled across the kitchen. "You hate fancy restaurants. I can survive one evening." She laughed. "I'll remember you said that when you complain about the prices." He grinned. "I probably will." Looking back later, Claire would replay that conversation hundreds of times. His smile, his voice, the way he kissed her forehead before leaving. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing warned her that by sunset, her entire life would be gone. Claire spent the afternoon at the Maple Ridge Public Library, where she'd worked for nearly 18 years. It wasn't glamorous work. She organized community events, managed schedules, helped people find books, and occasionally calmed frustrated patrons who couldn't figure out the self-checkout machines. She loved every minute of it. People often asked why she never looked for something bigger. She always answered the same way. Not every good life has to be exciting. Her coworker, Denise, appeared beside her desk carrying a small gift bag. "Happy birthday." The Claire smiled. "You didn't have to?" "I know." Denise shrugged, "But I wanted to." Inside was a handmade mug with tiny painted raindrops covering the sides. Claire laughed. "It's beautiful. I figured every librarian deserves more coffee." Claire hugged her. "Thank you." Denise leaned against the desk. "So, big plans tonight." Ethan made reservations. "Oh, apparently we're celebrating." "That's nice. And Lily's coming." The Denise hesitated. "Your sister's doing better." "I think so." The Claire nodded. "She's finally smiling again." Lily had moved into their house 8 months earlier after her divorce. She'd arrived carrying 2 suitcases and a face that looked like she'd forgotten how to hope. Claire never hesitated. Family didn't hesitate. She cleaned the guest room herself, cooked Lily's favorite meals, stayed awake through endless nights listening, while her younger sister cried over a marriage that had fallen apart. Claire never once considered it an inconvenience. That's what sisters did, or at least, that's what she believed. Denise smiled politely. "You're a better person than most." Claire shrugged. "If our situations were reversed, Lily would have done the same." Denise opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. Instead, she simply smiled. "I hope you have a wonderful birthday." "So do I." Claire meant it. She truly did. By 6:30, Claire stood in front of the bedroom mirror, wearing the navy blue dress Ethan had bought her 3 Christmases earlier. It wasn't new, but it was his favorite. "You always look happiest in blue," he'd once told her. She adjusted the necklace her mother had given her years ago. A tiny silver heart. Nothing expensive, just meaningful. She heard Lily knock softly. "You almost ready? Come in." Lily stepped inside wearing a cream-colored dress Claire had never seen before. "You look beautiful." Claire smiled. "So do you." Lily looked away. "Thanks. You nervous? For dinner?" Lily forced a smile. "I guess." Claire laughed. "Ethan probably picked somewhere that charges $12 for bottled water." Lily didn't laugh. Instead, she stared at the floor. "You okay?" "Just tired." Claire walked over. "You've been working too much." "I'm fine." The Claire hugged her. Lily hugged her back. For just a second, then pulled away. "I'll wait downstairs." Claire noticed Lily's eyes looked red. She assumed she'd been crying again over her divorce. She never imagined the real reason. The restaurant overlooked Maple Ridge Lake. It wasn't luxurious, but it was considered the nicest place in town. Soft piano music drifted through the dining room. Couples celebrated anniversaries. Families laughed over dinner. Waiters carried plates that smelled incredible. Claire reached for Ethan's hand as they walked inside. He let her hold it, but only for a moment. Then he quietly slipped his hand away. She frowned. "You okay?" "Yeah. You seem distracted, Long day." She accepted the answer. Married people did that. Not every silence needed investigating. Their table overlooked the water. Candles flickered gently. The waitress smiled warmly. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Bennett." "Thank you." Minas were handed around. Conversation stumbled. Claire tried filling the silence. "The library's finally getting approval for the children's reading room." "That's nice," Ethan answered. "Lily, UCM. Remember when we'd spend entire summers reading Grandma's mystery novels?" Lily nodded weakly. "I remember. You always skipped to the last chapter." I was impatient. "You still are." Claire smiled. Neither Ethan nor Lily smiled back. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Claire looked between them. Something felt off. Not wrong. Just different. She couldn't explain it. The waitress returned. Orders were placed. Nobody talked much while they waited. Claire finally laughed. "Okay. Somebody tell me what's going on." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. "You both look like you're waiting for the dentist." "It's nothing." Claire studied him. "You sure?" "Yeah." She let it go. Again. Because that's what 15 years of marriage teaches you. Trust. Dinner arrived. Claire barely touched hers. The strange silence had stolen her appetite. She finally raised her glass. "Well, here's to getting older." Nobody lifted their glasses. Claire laughed nervously. Seriously. Still nothing. Her smile slowly disappeared. Ethan. He took a deep breath. Then another. Finally he looked directly at her. "Claire." Something inside her tightened. "I need to tell you something." She frowned. "What is it?" He glanced toward Lily. Lily closed her eyes. Claire looked back and forth between them. Her heartbeat became strangely loud. "I don't understand." Ethan swallowed. "I've been trying to find the right time." "For what?" "There isn't an easy way to say this." Claire's hand suddenly felt cold. "Ethan, I'm leaving." The words floated across the table. Simple. Quiet. Impossible. Claire blinked. "What?" "I'm leaving." She laughed. Not because it was funny. Because her brain refused to understand. "What are you talking about?" "I'm moving out." "When?" "Tonight." Claire stared at him. "New." He nodded once. "I'm sorry." "New." She shook her head. "No. You're joking." "I wish I was." Claire looked toward Lily. "Lily, say something." The tears rolled down Lily's cheeks. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" Lily couldn't answer. Claire looked back at Ethan. "What is happening?" He took another breath. "I'm leaving with Lily." The entire restaurant disappeared. The piano, the conversations, the clinking glasses, everything, gone. Only those 5 words remained. "I'm leaving with Lily." Claire stared, then laughed again. A broken sound. "No." Nobody moved. "No." She looked at Lily. "Tell him to stop." Lily covered her face. Claire reached across the table. "Lily?" A nothing. "Lily?" Finally Lily whispered, "I love him." Claire froze. "I'm sorry." "No." Claire's voice barely existed now. "No. No you don't." What didn't mean for it to happen. Claire looked between them again. Her breathing became uneven. "When?" Neither answered. "When?" Ethan finally spoke. "Almost a year." Claire couldn't finish the sentence. "A year." He nodded. "Around 11 months." Claire stared at Lily. "You were living in my house." Lily cried harder. "I know. I cooked your meals. I know. I held you while you cried over your divorce. I know." Claire looked at Ethan. "And you, Her voice cracked. "You came home every night." "I did." "You kissed me?" Silence. "You told me you loved me." Silence. "You slept beside me." Silence. Across the restaurant, conversations had stopped. People weren't pretending not to listen anymore. Everyone knew something terrible was happening. Claire didn't care. Not anymore. She looked back at Lily. "Tell me this isn't real." Lily whispered. I'm pregnant. Claire felt every ounce of strength leave her body. The baby. Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the whispered conversations, the awkward silences, the guilt. Claire slowly leaned back in her chair. Nobody spoke. Finally, she looked at Ethan. So, this dinner? He lowered his eyes. We thought it would be better if we told you together. She laughed again. A hollow, unfamiliar sound. You brought me here. For my birthday. Sorry. You gave me a birthday dinner. To tell me you're leaving me for my sister. Tears finally spilled down her face. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent, constant. A man at a nearby table quietly reached across and held his wife's hand. Even strangers look heartbroken. Claire looked around the restaurant. Every face reflected pity. She had never felt so exposed, so small, so utterly alone. She stood. Her chair scraped loudly across the floor. Ethan? He looked up. I helped build your business. I know. I worked weekends so you could take contracts. I know. I gave up having children because we couldn't afford treatments. His face crumpled. I know. I defended you every time someone doubted you. I know. She looked at Lily. I gave you my home. Lily sobbed openly. Claire nodded slowly. I hope, her voice almost disappeared. I hope whatever the two of you have was worth losing everything. She turned and began walking away. Claire, Ethan stood. She didn't stop. Claire, please. She kept walking. Outside, rain had started falling. Cold, steady, relentless. She didn't open the umbrella in her purse. She didn't even remember carrying one. She simply walked. People called after her from behind. She never turned around. As she reached her car, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. I'm sorry. 2 words. After 15 years. Claire stared at the screen, then quietly placed the phone inside her purse without replying. The drive home felt endless. Streetlights blurred through tears she no longer bothered wiping away. Every familiar road suddenly felt foreign. Every memory hurt. She parked in the driveway and sat there for several minutes, unable to move. Eventually, she forced herself out of the car. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. She stepped into the living room. Something immediately felt wrong. She looked toward the staircase. The hallway closet stood open. She hurried upstairs. The bedroom door was half open. When she pushed it wider, she stopped breathing. Ethan's side of the closet was almost empty. His dresser drawers were open. Half the hangers were gone. His suitcase, gone. The framed photograph from their honeymoon was missing from the nightstand. He hadn't decided tonight. He had been leaving for days, maybe weeks, maybe longer. This dinner hadn't been a confession. It had been a farewell. Claire slowly sat on the edge of the bed they had shared for 15 years. The silence inside the room was louder than any scream. She looked at the empty closet one last time. Then the realization finally settled over her. She hadn't just lost her husband. She had lost the life she thought she knew. If you've ever had someone you trusted completely change your life in a single moment, let me know in the comments. Your story might remind someone listening that they aren't alone. And if you're enjoying this journey, consider subscribing, because sometimes the hardest stories lead to the most unexpected endings. Claire didn't sleep. She tried. She lay on one side of the bed until her shoulder hurt. Then she turned over and stared at the empty half where Ethan had slept for 15 years. The indentation in the mattress was still there. His pillow still smelled faintly of his cologne. She picked it up, held it against her chest, then threw it across the room. The sound echoed through the silent house. For the first time that night, she cried. Not the quiet tears she'd shed at the restaurant. These came in waves. The kind that stole your breath. The kind that made your chest ache. The kind that left you wondering how your heart could keep beating when it felt completely broken. The alarm rang at 6:30. Claire stared at it. For years, She'd been the first one awake. Coffee at 6. Breakfast at 6:15. Wake Ethan at 6:30 if he hadn't already gotten up. Pack his lunch. Water the plants. Feed the neighbor's cat whenever they were away. Her mornings had always followed the same rhythm. Today there was no rhythm. Only silence. She switched the alarm off. It kept ringing inside her head anyway. The coffee tasted bitter. She hadn't changed the brand. Nothing had changed. Except everything. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Mom. Claire let it ring. A minute later it rang again. Dad. Then Lily. Then Mom again. She turned the phone over. She wasn't ready. She wasn't sure she ever would be. By 8 o'clock she knew she couldn't hide forever. She answered on the fourth call. Hello. Her mother's voice cracked immediately. Claire. Sweetheart. Claire closed her eyes. I don't want to talk. I know? No, you don't? Silence. Her mother took a slow breath. We found out last night. When? This morning. Claire almost laughed. So they waited until after humiliating me before telling everyone else. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Claire gripped the phone tighter. Really? Another pause. Your father and I are coming over. No. We just want to. I said no. Claire. I can't do this today. Her mother hesitated, then quietly asked, Have you spoken to Lily? Claire's jaw tightened. I don't have a sister. The word surprised even her. She ended the call before her mother could answer. Around 10 o'clock there was a knock at the door. Claire looked through the curtains. Her parents. She considered pretending she wasn't home. Instead, she opened the door. Her mother hugged her immediately. Claire didn't hug back. Her father stood awkwardly beside them. He looked older than she remembered. We brought breakfast. I'm not hungry. Our mother carried the bag inside anyway. For several minutes nobody spoke. Finally her father cleared his throat. We're sorry. So. Claire nodded. So am I. Her mother reached across the table. Lily made a terrible mistake. Claire slowly looked up. A mistake. Claire? No. She leaned back. Buying the wrong cereal is a mistake. Her mother looked away. Forgetting someone's birthday is a mistake. Please. A year-long affair with your sister's husband isn't a mistake. Silence filled the kitchen. Her father rubbed his forehead. We're not defending what happened. It sounds like you are. We're trying to understand. Claire stared at him. I don't need you to understand. She swallowed. I need my parents. Neither answered. Finally, her mother whispered. She's still your sister. Claire felt something inside her snap. No. Her voice remained calm. Almost too calm. The woman who was my sister disappeared the day she climbed into my husband's bed. Her mother began crying. Claire didn't. She had no tears left. Her father stood. We should give you some space. Claire nodded once. As they reached the front door, her mother turned around. We love you. Claire managed a weak smile. I wish that felt enough right now. The door closed behind them. The house became silent again. 2 days later, Claire forced herself to return to work. She needed normal, or something that looked like it. The library doors opened at 9. She smiled at the first patron. Returned books. Answered questions. Helped an elderly man print photos of his grandchildren. For almost an hour she almost believed life could continue. Then she walked into the staff room. Conversation stopped immediately. 3 coworkers stood around the coffee machine. Nobody moved. Nobody smiled. One quietly picked up her mug and left. Another suddenly remembered paperwork she needed to finish. Only Denise remained. She looked furious. Not at Claire. At everyone else. You okay? Claire nodded automatically. I'm fine. Denise folded her arms. No, you're not. Claire's eyes filled. I almost made it. Denise hugged her. They don't know what to say. I know. It isn't fair. Claire shook her head. No, it isn't. Just then 2 voices drifted in from the hallway. Heard he left her for the sister. I heard they've been together for months. Someone said Claire was controlling. Claire froze. Denise stepped toward the doorway. "Excuse me." The whispering stopped instantly. "If you want to gossip." Denise said firmly, "At least have the decency not to do it where she can hear you." Nobody answered. The hallway emptied. Claire stared at the floor. "They don't know the truth." Denise sighed. "Unfortunately, people usually prefer rumors." The rumors spread faster than the facts. At the grocery store, people smiled too kindly. Neighbors suddenly became interested in taking out their trash the exact moment Claire pulled into the driveway. She caught conversations stopping when she entered rooms. She noticed people looking away, or staring too long. The worst part wasn't being judged. It was not knowing who believed what. A week later, Claire met with her divorce attorney. Margaret Collins had practiced family law for nearly 30 years. She didn't waste words. "I'll be honest." The Claire nodded. "I'd appreciate that." Margaret opened the file. "Ethan wants an uncontested divorce." "Of course he does. He also wants to retain full ownership of Bennett Construction." Claire laughed bitterly. "The company I helped build." "You worked there for almost 10 years. In what capacity?" "Bookkeeping, scheduling, payroll, marketing, everything that didn't involve swinging a hammer." Margaret made several notes. "Were you paid?" Claire hesitated. "Not really." Margaret looked over her glasses. "Not really. Ethan always said we were building our future together." Margaret sighed quietly. "I've heard that sentence before." Claire leaned back. "So what happens now?" "We'll fight for what's legally yours." "I don't want revenge." "This isn't revenge." Margaret closed the folder. "This is fairness." Claire looked out the office window. "I don't even know what fairness looks like anymore." That afternoon, she stopped by the house. Their house. She hated calling it that now. The mailbox overflowed with advertisements. Inside, the silence felt heavier than before. She noticed something she hadn't seen that first night. The bookshelf in the living room. Several photo albums were missing. So were Ethan's fishing trophies. His favorite leather chair. He hadn't packed in one evening. He'd been slowly emptying their life while pretending nothing had changed. Claire walked upstairs. Opened the linen closet. One shelf sat completely empty. Another piece of the puzzle. Another lie. She whispered into the empty hallway. "How long were you planning this?" No answer came. Only silence. That evening the doorbell rang. Claire opened it cautiously. Lily stood on the porch. Alone. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Claire didn't speak. Neither did Lily. Finally Lily whispered, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Claire stared at her. "You already did." "I know. I don't think you understand what that word means." Lily looked down. "I never wanted to hurt you." Claire almost laughed. "You had nearly a year to stop. I loved him. And I loved both of you." Lily wiped away tears. "We didn't plan it." "No." Claire nodded slowly. "You just kept choosing it." Lily couldn't argue. Claire noticed her sister instinctively resting a hand on her stomach. The baby. For a split second, Claire felt something unexpected. Not anger, sadness. That child hadn't asked for any of this. Lily looked up. "I miss my sister." Claire's eyes finally hardened. "The sister you missed died the night you chose my husband over your family." Lily broke down. Claire gently closed the door. Not slammed. Not violently. Just closed it. She leaned against it after Lily walked away. Her knees gave out. She slid slowly onto the floor. This wasn't getting easier. If anything, every day uncovered another layer of pain. As night fell over Maple Ridge, Claire picked up the stack of unopened mail from the kitchen counter. Among the bills and advertisements was a thick envelope from Ethan's attorney. She already knew what it contained before she opened it. The official divorce papers. She stared at her name on the first page. 15 years together. Reduced to signatures. She reached for a pen, then stopped. Something deep inside told her not to rush, not because she wanted Ethan back. That part of her was already gone. But because she was beginning to realize this divorce wasn't simply the end of her marriage. It was the beginning of a fight she had never wanted. And before she signed away the life she'd helped build, she intended to learn exactly what it was worth. Claire left the divorce papers untouched for 3 days. They sat on the kitchen table exactly where she'd dropped them. Every time she walked past them, she looked away. It wasn't denial. She knew her marriage was over. Sending the papers simply made it permanent. Saturday morning arrived gray and unusually quiet. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. Claire wrapped both hands around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Her phone buzzed. "Denise, how are you holding up?" Claire smiled faintly. "Is there a polite answer to that?" "I was hoping for an honest one." Claire looked around the empty kitchen. "I don't know who I am today." There was silence on the other end. Then Denise said, "You don't have to figure that out today." Claire closed her eyes. "I spent 15 years being Ethan's wife. I know. I don't even know what groceries I actually like." "What?" Claire laughed softly. "It sounds ridiculous." "No. Ethan hated mushrooms. So I stopped buying them." "You like mushrooms." "I love them." Denise chuckled. "Then buy mushrooms." Claire smiled for the first time that morning. It seemed like such a small thing. Yet somehow, it wasn't. Margaret Collins called later that afternoon. "I've reviewed everything." Claire sat a little straighter. "Okay, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Do you know exactly how much Bennett Construction is worth?" Claire hesitated. "No." "Do you know how many contracts the company currently has?" "No." "Were you ever listed as an owner?" "I don't think so." Margaret sighed. "Claire, I trusted my husband." "I know. But trust isn't a legal document." Claire stared out the window. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Ethan built that business while you were married." "We built it." "Exactly." Margaret paused. "Don't let guilt convince you to walk away from what you've earned." Claire rubbed her forehead. "I don't want his money. This isn't his money. It's your future." That evening, Claire unlocked the office attached to the garage. Years ago, she'd helped Ethan design the space. Invoices, blueprints, payroll files, everything had once passed through this room. Dust covered the desk now. The computer was gone. Most filing cabinets had been emptied. But Ethan hadn't taken everything. Claire pulled open one drawer. Old receipts, insurance papers, tax folders, customer thank you cards. She smiled sadly. She remembered handwriting many of them herself. Another drawer held photographs from company picnics, holiday parties, groundbreaking ceremonies. There she was, standing beside Ethan, smiling, always smiling. One picture caught her attention. It showed Ethan accepting a local business award. He stood proudly at the podium. Claire was in the background, holding his jacket, almost completely hidden. She stared at it for a long time, then quietly whispered, "I was always in the background." The following Monday, she met Margaret again. This time, Ethan was there. So was his attorney. It was the first time they'd seen each other since the restaurant. Ethan stood when she entered. "You look..." He stopped. Claire answered before he could finish. "Tired." He nodded. "I'm sorry." She ignored him. Margaret motioned toward the conference table. The meeting began. Numbers filled the room. Property values, retirement accounts, vehicles, investments. Claire barely spoke. Then Ethan's attorney slid a document across the table. "My client is willing to offer a generous settlement." Claire looked down. The amount seemed large. Larger than she'd expected. Margaret didn't even blink. She simply pushed it back. "Well, decline." Ethan frowned. "Claire." Margaret answered for her. "My client is entitled to a full valuation of Bennett Construction." Ethan shifted in his chair. "The business has debts." "We'll verify that." It isn't worth fighting over. Margaret smiled politely. Then you won't mind opening the books. A muscle twitched in Ethan's jaw. Claire noticed. For the first time since everything happened, she realized Ethan looked nervous. Not guilty, nervous. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. Claire gathered her purse. As she reached the parking lot, Ethan called after her. Claire. She stopped but didn't turn around. Can we talk? No. Just 5 minutes. I've already given you 15 years. Silence. She began walking again. I never wanted to hurt you. She stopped. Slowly turned. You never wanted to stop either. Ethan lowered his eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen. Claire almost smiled. That seems to be everyone's favorite sentence. I know you hate me. She shook her head. No. He looked surprised. Hate takes energy. Another pause. I'm just disappointed. She walked to her car. Before getting inside, she looked back one last time. I would have forgiven almost anything. Ethan's eyes filled. I know. No. Claire shook her head. If you knew. None of this would have happened. She drove away. This time he didn't follow. The divorce became the biggest story Maple Ridge had seen in years. Claire discovered that in small towns, silence rarely lasted long. At the grocery store, an elderly woman squeezed her hand. I'm praying for you. Another customer whispered loudly enough for Claire to hear. I heard he finally found someone who appreciated him. Claire kept walking. At the gas station, 2 construction workers recognized her. One nodded respectfully. The other quickly looked away. Everywhere she went, people had chosen sides. Some openly, others quietly. Claire hated all of it. She wished they would simply forget her. A week later, she met her realtor. Sandra Hughes had kind eyes and spoke gently. I know this isn't easy. Claire nodded. I can't stay here. You've made your decision. I have. Sandra looked around the living room. It's a beautiful home. Claire smiled sadly. It used to be. The house went on the market 3 days later. Claire spent hours packing. Every box held another memory. Christmas ornaments, camping equipment, old birthday cards, wedding gifts still tucked away in closets. She found a faded grocery list stuck between 2 cookbooks. Milk, bread, coffee, dog food. She laughed softly. They'd never owned a dog. Ethan had written, someday, beside it. She folded the paper carefully, then placed it in the trash. Some dreams no longer belonged to her. Late one afternoon, she climbed into the attic. It smelled of cedar and dust. Sunlight slipped through the tiny window. There were boxes everywhere. One was labeled simply Kalelgi. She opened it. Inside were photographs of 2 young sisters, Claire and Lily. One picture showed them building a blanket fort. Another showed Lily missing her 2 front teeth. A third showed Claire teaching her little sister to ride a bicycle. Claire sat on the floor, holding the photographs, crying quietly. Not because she missed the woman Lily had become, because she missed the little girl she once protected. The house sold faster than expected. A young couple made an offer after their second visit. They were expecting their first baby. They walked through every room smiling, planning, dreaming. Claire watched from the kitchen. She remembered doing exactly the same thing 15 years earlier. When the paperwork was finalized, the buyers asked one question. Were you happy here? Claire looked around the house. She answered honestly. For a long time, yes. Moving day arrived 2 weeks later. A rental truck filled the driveway. Denise came to help. So did 2 coworkers from the library. Even Margaret stopped by carrying coffee. Piece by piece, Claire's life disappeared into cardboard boxes. The walls became bare. The rooms echoed. By sunset, only one thing remained. A framed family photograph. Claire, Ethan, Lily. Taken during a 4th of July picnic years earlier. They were all laughing. Nobody looking at the camera. Nobody pretending. Or maybe they already were. Claire lifted the frame from the wall. She studied it for several seconds, then carefully removed the photograph. Not to keep Ethan. Not even to keep Lily. But because she refused to let strangers throw away the evidence that, once upon a time, they had been a family. She placed the photo inside a box marked Père Sunel. The front door stood open. The moving truck was waiting. Claire walked through each empty room one last time. The kitchen where she and Ethan had danced while making pancakes on Sunday mornings. The living room where they watched old movies every Christmas Eve. The spare bedroom where Lily had stayed after her divorce. Every room held a memory. Every memory now carried a different meaning. She reached the front door, turned off the lights, locked it, then rested her hand against the wood for just a moment. Goodbye. She climbed into her car. The moving truck pulled away first. Claire followed. The highway stretched ahead. 45 minutes. That was all that separated Maple Ridge from the tiny town of Ashford. Her grandmother's old farmhouse waited there. She hadn't visited in nearly 8 years. She remembered peeling apples in the kitchen, watching her grandfather build furniture in the old workshop, running barefoot across the fields during summer vacations. It wasn't much, but it was hers. As Maple Ridge disappeared in her rearview mirror, Claire expected to feel relief. Instead, she felt something else: fear. For the first time since she was 27 years old, she had absolutely no idea what came next. And waiting at the end of that quiet country road was a house she hadn't seen in years. And a life she never imagined she would have to begin all over again. Claire reached Ashford just before sunset. The two-lane highway narrowed into quiet country roads lined with maple trees and old wooden fences. The farther she drove, the quieter everything became. No traffic. No crowded intersections. No familiar landmarks reminding her of the life she'd lost. Just open fields stretching toward the horizon. She rolled down the window. Fresh air filled the car. For the first time in weeks, she took a deep breath. That didn't feel painful. The farmhouse appeared around the bend exactly where she remembered. White paint, or what was left of it. The porch sagged slightly on one side. Several shutters hung crooked. Tall grass had swallowed most of the front yard. The old red barn leaned just enough to make her nervous. She parked beside the mailbox. The letters carved into it had nearly faded. B.E.T. Her grandfather had built it by hand nearly 40 years earlier. Claire rested her hand on the weathered wood. "I'm home." The words felt strange. She wasn't sure she believed them. The front door groaned as she pushed it open. Dust floated through the evening light. The house smelled exactly as she remembered. Old wood. Books. A faint trace of cedar. It wasn't unpleasant. It smelled lived in. Even after all these years. She walked slowly from room to room. The furniture remained covered with white sheets. Her grandmother's rocking chair still sat beside the fireplace. The grandfather clock in the hallway had stopped years ago. 3:17. The same time it had been frozen since her grandmother's funeral. Claire smiled sadly. Some things waited patiently. Even when people couldn't. She spent the next hour opening windows. Fresh air drifted through every room. Birds sang outside. A breeze carried the scent of freshly cut hay from a neighboring farm. It wasn't perfect. Far from it. But the silence here felt different. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. The moving truck arrived just before dark. The driver helped unload the heavier furniture. By 8 o'clock, boxes filled nearly every room. Claire thanked him and closed the front door. She was officially alone. She heated a can of tomato soup, found one clean bowl, one spoon, then sat at the old kitchen table where she'd eaten countless meals as a child. The house creaked softly around her. She smiled. "I forgot how noisy old houses are." Nobody answered. Oddly enough, that didn't bother her. The next morning began before sunrise. Not because she had to. Because she couldn't stay in bed. She made coffee. Stepped onto the front porch. Morning mist rolled across the fields. The sunrise painted the sky shades of orange and pink. She hadn't watched a sunrise in years. There had never been time. Work. Bills. Schedules. Deadlines. There had always been something more important. Maybe there hadn't. By mid-morning, Claire had filled 6 trash bags, old newspapers, broken lamps, boxes of things no one would ever use again. The work kept her mind busy. Every shelf she cleaned felt like one small corner of her life becoming manageable again. She was dragging another box toward the garage when she heard a truck pull into the driveway. A gray pickup stopped beside the porch. An older man climbed out wearing denim overalls and a faded baseball cap. He smiled before speaking. "You must be Evelyn's granddaughter." The Claire smiled politely. "I am." He extended his hand. "Frank Dawson." She shook it. "My grandparents talked about you." "I'd hope so." He laughed. "I fixed enough tractors around here." The Claire smiled. "It's nice to meet you." Frank looked toward the barn. "Looks like you've got your work cut out for you." "You noticed." "I noticed from half a mile away." They both laughed. It felt surprisingly easy. Frank looked back toward the workshop, still standing. "Barely. Your grandfather built that place himself." The Claire followed his gaze. "I remember. He'd spend more time in that workshop than inside the house. He loved building things." Frank nodded. "He sure did." He paused. "If you need anything at all, just ask." The Claire thanked him. Before leaving, Frank added quietly, "Your grandparents would have been happy to see someone living here again." After he drove away, Claire stood in the driveway a little longer than necessary. For the first time since arriving, the property didn't feel abandoned. It felt remembered. Later that afternoon, Claire finally unlocked the workshop. The heavy wooden door stuck halfway. She pushed harder. Dust exploded into the sunlight. Inside, time had stopped. Workbench, shelves, hand tools, jars filled with old screws and nails. Everything remained exactly where her grandfather had left it. She slowly walked around the room. There was his measuring tape, his old radio, a pair of safety glasses resting beside a wood plane. She picked them up carefully. "I miss you." The words escaped before she realized she'd spoken them. She swallowed hard, then noticed something leaning against the far wall. An unfinished rocking chair. Half sanded, half assembled. She remembered it immediately. Her grandfather had been building it for her grandmother before he passed away. He never finished it. Claire gently brushed years of dust away. She ran her fingers across the smooth wood. "I think maybe it's time." She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the workshop. Every tool had its place. Every shelf slowly came back to life. She found herself smiling more often than crying. There was comfort in working with her hands. Wood didn't lie. Measurements didn't betray you. If something broke, you could usually repair it. People weren't always that simple. The following Saturday, Ashford held its weekly farmers market downtown. Claire needed groceries. She also needed to be around people. The town square buzzed with activity. Children chased one another around a fountain. Local musicians played country music near the gazebo. Fresh produce filled colorful stalls. Nobody looked at her twice. Nobody whispered. Nobody knew her story. It was refreshing. She stopped at a bakery. An elderly woman behind the counter smiled warmly. "First time here." Claire nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "We remember new faces." The Claire laughed. "I just moved here." "Well then." The woman slid an extra cinnamon roll into the bag. "Welcome to Ashford." The Claire blinked. "You don't have to. I know." The woman smiled. "But I wanted to." Claire thanked her. Such a small kindness. Yet after everything she'd been through, it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Back at the farmhouse, Claire carried the groceries inside. As she unpacked them, her eyes landed on the workshop through the kitchen window. The unfinished rocking chair waited patiently. She carried her coffee outside, put on her grandfather's old work apron. adjusted the lamp over the bench, then picked up a sanding block. The familiar motion returned almost immediately. Slow, steady, back and forth. The rough edges gradually became smooth beneath her hands. Hours disappeared. She forgot to check her phone. Forgot to think about Ethan. Forgot to think about Lily. For the first time in months, her mind became quiet. 3 days later, Frank returned. He found Claire staining the nearly completed rocking chair. He whistled softly. "Well, I'll be." Claire looked up. "What?" "I haven't seen that chair in 20 years. She smiled. "I figured somebody should finish it." Frank walked around it slowly. He ran his fingers lightly across the polished armrest. "Your grandfather would have been proud." Claire felt warmth spread through her chest. "I hope so." Frank looked thoughtful. "My daughter runs an antique store in town." Claire nodded. "Okay, mind if I show her a picture?" Claire laughed. "Go ahead. I think she'd like it." 2 days later, Frank called. "My daughter wants to buy the chair." Claire blinked. "Buy it. She says it'll sell before the week's over." Claire looked toward the workshop. "I wasn't planning on selling it." "Fair enough." Frank chuckled. "But if you ever decide to build another one..." Claire smiled. "I'll think about it." After hanging up, she stood quietly inside the workshop. She looked around at the tools. The wood stacked neatly against the wall. The unfinished projects waiting on old shelves. Then she remembered something her grandfather used to tell her. A good piece of furniture isn't just built. It's cared for until someone else is ready to love it. Claire smiled. Maybe, just maybe, the same could be true for people. She looked back at the rocking chair, then toward the empty corner of the workshop. An idea had quietly taken root, one she hadn't considered before. What if this place could become more than a memory? What if it could become her future? She didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time since that birthday dinner, she found herself excited to discover it. 3 weeks later, the workshop no longer looked abandoned. The floor had been swept. The windows were clean. Every tool hung neatly on the wall. Shelves that had once been buried beneath dust now held carefully sorted lumber, jars of hardware, and cans of stain arranged by color. Claire stood in the middle of the room with her hands on her hips. "It still needs work." She smiled anyway. Her grandfather would have said the same thing. There was always another improvement to make. Frank stopped by carrying a cardboard box. "Morning. Morning." He set the box on the workbench. "My daughter insisted." Claire looked inside. Sandpaper, wood glue, finishing oil, several new clamps. She looked up. "I can't accept all this." Frank waved a hand. "You can." "It's too much." "No." He smiled. "It's an investment." "In what?" "In seeing this workshop alive again." Claire laughed. "You and your daughter are awfully confident." "We've got eyes." He pointed toward the rocking chair. "That thing sold 2 days after she put it on the showroom floor." Claire blinked. "Already?" Frank nodded proudly. "Young couple bought it." "What did they pay?" He told her. Claire stared at him. "They paid that much. They said it reminded them of the chair their grandmother used to own." Claire sat down slowly. "I almost kept it." "I'm glad you didn't." She looked confused. "Why?" "Because now you know." "Know what?" Frank smiled. "People are willing to pay for something built with care." That afternoon, Claire drove into Ashford and rented a small booth inside Frank's daughter's antique store. The owner, Susan Dawson, greeted her warmly. "So you're the famous granddaughter." Claire laughed. "I don't think famous is the right word. I sold your rocking chair." "So I've heard." Susan smiled. The customer cried. Claire fried. Cried? They said it felt like home. Claire looked around the store. Beautiful antiques filled every corner. Old clocks. Dining tables. Handmade quilts. Each piece carried a history. "I don't know if I can make enough furniture." Susan folded her arms. "You don't have to." Claire looked at her. Restore what already exists. Claire thought about it. Old furniture. Just like old houses. Just like old lives. Sometimes things didn't need replacing. They simply needed someone willing to repair them. The following month settled into a rhythm. Monday through Thursday, Claire worked mornings at the Ashford Public Library. The smaller library felt different from Maple Ridge. People knew each other's names. Children raced to the reading corner after school. Retired couples lingered over newspapers. Nobody knew Claire as the woman whose husband ran away with her sister. She was simply Claire, the librarian. She liked that. Afternoons belonged to the workshop. Some days she repaired dining chairs. Other days she refinished coffee tables or repaired broken cabinets. Her hands became rough again. She didn't mind. Each scratch on her fingers reminded her she'd built something instead of mourning something. One Friday afternoon Susan called. "You busy tomorrow? I was planning to sand a dresser." "Do it Sunday." "Why?" "We're setting up at the county artisan market." Claire frowned. "I don't have enough inventory. You've got 5 pieces." "That's not much." Susan laughed. "Then we'll make your booth look empty on purpose." "What?" "Scarcity sells." But Claire couldn't help smiling. "I think you're making that up, Di." "I absolutely am." Saturday morning arrived bright and cool. Claire arranged her furniture beneath a white canopy, a restored oak bench, 2 side tables, an antique trunk, a rocking chair, a small writing desk she'd rescued from a curbside trash pile. She stared at everything nervously. "It isn't enough." Susan walked over carrying coffee. "It never feels like enough." "What if nobody stops?" "They will. And if they don't?" Suzanne handed her the coffee. "Then you'll still go home having tried." For the first hour hardly anyone looked. People wandered past. Some smiled politely. Others barely noticed. Claire pretended not to care. Inside, she cared very much. Then an older gentleman stopped in front of the writing desk. He ran his hand gently across the polished surface. "You restored this?" Claire nodded. "It was headed for the landfill." He smiled. "My father had one exactly like it." He opened every drawer, inspected every joint. Finally, he looked at the price tag. "I'll take it." Claire blinked. "Really?" He laughed. "Young lady, I haven't been called young in years. You are compared to me." They both laughed. He reached for his wallet. As Susan wrapped the desk, Claire watched someone carry away a piece she'd spent nearly 30 hours restoring. Instead of sadness, she felt pride. By late afternoon, only one piece remained, the oak bench. Susan walked over smiling. "I told you." Claire looked around at the empty spaces in her booth. "I wasn't expecting this." "No one ever is." Claire counted the day's earnings. It wasn't enough to change her life, but it was enough to pay next month's utility bills, without touching her savings. That mattered. A lot. Driving home, Claire stopped at the grocery store. For the first time in years, she wandered the aisles without thinking about anyone else's preferences. She bought mushrooms, extra sharp cheddar, dark chocolate, a loaf of sourdough bread. On impulse, she added a bouquet of fresh sunflowers to the cart. Halfway through checkout, she smiled. Nobody had told her to buy them. Nobody had asked. She simply wanted flowers. That realization stayed with her the entire drive home. A month later, the workshop had more orders than she'd expected. Word spread quickly. People began recommending the woman who could make old furniture look new. Claire created a simple website. Nothing fancy, just photographs and a phone number. She almost didn't include her name. Then she did. Claire Bennett Restoration. She stared at the screen. The surname still belonged to Ethan too. For a moment she considered changing it. Then she shook her head. "No." She whispered the word aloud. "It belongs to me too." She had carried that name honestly. She wasn't giving it away because someone else had dishonored it. Business continued growing. One customer wanted a dining table repaired. Another asked whether she could build matching chairs. A retired couple hired her to restore an entire bedroom set that had belonged to the husband's grandparents. Every project came with a story. Claire listened carefully to each one. She realized furniture wasn't really what people were paying for. They were paying to preserve memories. That made the work feel meaningful. One rainy afternoon, she received an email from a woman in the next county. Attached were photographs of an old cedar chest. The message read, "My grandmother left this to me before she passed away. Everyone says it's beyond saving. Susan Dawson told me if anyone could bring it back, it's you." Claire smiled. She typed a simple reply. "Bring it by. Let's see what we can do." She hit send, then leaned back in her chair. She'd just scheduled work 6 weeks in advance. 6 weeks. She hadn't imagined that was possible. That evening, she lit a fire in the living room. The farmhouse felt warmer now, not because the repairs were finished, because it was beginning to feel lived in. She carried her dinner to the coffee table and turned on the local news. Halfway through the broadcast, the anchor smiled. "Our business spotlight tonight features one of Maple Ridge's fastest-growing companies." Claire looked up. Bennett Construction. A camera followed Ethan through a luxury home under construction. He smiled confidently. Employees praised his leadership. The reporter spoke about record profits, expansion into neighboring counties, plans for a second office. Then Lily appeared. She rested a hand on her very pregnant stomach while smiling beside Ethan. The reporter called them one of Maple Ridge's most inspiring success stories. Claire reached for the remote. She meant to turn it off. Instead, she watched. Not because she wanted to, because she couldn't stop. The interview ended with Ethan saying, "I couldn't have built any of this without the love and support of my family." The screen faded to commercial. Claire stared at the blank television. Her chest tightened. Not because she missed him. Not because she wanted her old life back. But because she remembered all the late nights balancing payroll. All the weekends answering customer calls. All the invoices she'd prepared while Ethan slept. Years of work. Years of sacrifice. Reduced to a sentence that erased her completely. She switched the television off. The room fell silent. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Claire walked to the workshop. She turned on the lights. The familiar smell of cedar and varnish wrapped around her. She rested both hands on the workbench. Then she smiled. Very slightly. They can keep the spotlight. She picked up a block of walnut, measured it carefully, and began marking the first cuts for a custom rocking chair. Not because she needed the money, but because every piece she built reminded her of something she'd almost forgotten. She was no longer rebuilding a life that had been taken from her. She was building one that belonged entirely to her. She had no idea that before long, a simple trip to an estate auction would introduce her to someone who understood exactly what it meant to start over. The estate auction was held on the edge of Ashford in an old red barn that had belonged to the Peterson family for nearly 70 years. Claire arrived 20 minutes early. She wasn't there looking for bargains. She was looking for forgotten pieces. Old furniture, boxes of hand tools, anything with good bones. She had learned that people often underestimated what could be repaired. She understood that better than most. The barn buzzed with conversation. Collectors inspected antique cabinets. Young couples searched for inexpensive furniture. Retirees wandered slowly from table to table, sharing stories about things they remembered from childhood. Claire picked up an old brass lamp. The wiring was shot. The shade was stained. Still, she smiled. It just needs someone to believe in it. An older volunteer overheard her. "I've never heard anyone talk to furniture before." Claire laughed. "I spend too much time in my workshop." "No such thing." He winked before walking away. Near the back of the barn sat a dusty woodworking bench. It wasn't beautiful. Years of use had covered it in scratches and paint stains. One corner was chipped. One drawer refused to close. Most people walked past without slowing down. Claire stopped immediately. She ran her hand across the thick maple top. Solid. Heavy. Built by someone who cared. This belonged to a real craftsman. She knelt to inspect the joints. Whoever built it had used dovetail joinery. Everything about it spoke of patience. She smiled. I could use you. Looks like we had the same idea. The voice came from behind her. Claire stood and turned. A man about her age smiled politely. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His dark brown hair carried a few strands of gray near the temples. Wire-rimmed glasses rested low on his nose. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that demanded attention. He simply looked kind. I'm sorry, Claire said. I didn't realize someone else was looking at it. He shrugged. I've been circling it for 10 minutes. So Claire laughed. So have I. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he extended his hand. Daniel Brooks. She shook it. Claire Bennett. His smile remained warm. You restore furniture. Is it that obvious? He pointed toward the workbench. You looked at the joinery before you looked at the price. She smiled. Guilty? What about you? My garage desperately needs a proper workbench. You build furniture too. He chuckled. I wish. I'm a history teacher. Claire looked surprised. History. My grandfather was a carpenter. He rested a hand on the bench. I inherited his tools. You actually use them. Mostly when something breaks. That's more than most people. Daniel nodded. I've always thought it's nice fixing things instead of replacing them. Claire looked at him for a second longer than she intended. So have I. The auction began. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly. The auctioneer spoke so fast Claire wondered if he ever breathed. Items disappeared one after another. Boxes, chairs, cabinets, paintings. Then the woodworking bench rolled onto the platform. Bidding starts at $100. Claire raised her paddle. So do I, Daniel said quietly. The auctioneer pointed. 100. Daniel lifted his paddle. 125. Claire smiled. 150. Daniel looked over. You drive a hard bargain. I haven't even started. People nearby chuckled. The bidding continued. 170. 5. 200. 225. Daniel sighed dramatically. You know, teachers aren't exactly famous for their salaries. The Claire grinned. Neither are librarians. The auctioneer looked back and forth between them. 250. Claire hesitated. It was worth more. But she had promised herself she wouldn't overspend. Daniel raised his paddle again. 275. Claire lowered hers. The auctioneer called 3 times. Sold? Daniel smiled apologetically. I'm sorry. She shrugged. It'll have a good home. I promised. He paused. If it makes you feel any better, it won't. He laughed. I figured. After the auction, Claire loaded several smaller purchases into her pickup truck. An antique mirror. A cedar chest with damaged hinges. A box of hand planes. She reached for the heaviest crate. It barely moved. You've got it? Daniel's voice again. I think so. The crate slipped. He caught it before it hit the ground. I definitely didn't have it. He smiled. Mind if I help? Claire looked at the awkwardly shaped box. I'd be stubborn if I said no. Excellent. Together they carried it to her truck. That's heavier than it looks. It always is. What is it? I won't know until I clean it. Daniel laughed. I like that answer. They finished loading everything. Claire brushed dust from her hands. Thank you. My pleasure. He looked toward the workbench now sitting in his truck. I almost feel guilty. You should. I was afraid you'd say that. They both laughed. It felt easy, comfortable. Unexpectedly so. As they prepared to leave, a teenage girl climbed out of Daniel's truck. She looked about 15. long brown hair tied into a ponytail, backpack slung over one shoulder. She walked over carrying 2 lemonades. "There you are." Daniel smiled. "I survived." "Barely." She noticed Claire. "Oh," Daniel smiled. "Claire, this is my daughter, Emma." Emma offered her hand immediately. "It's nice to meet you." "You too." Emma looked toward the truck. "Did Dad buy the workbench?" "He stole it from me." Daniel looked offended. "I won it fairly." Emma laughed. "He gets strangely competitive at auctions." "I do not." "You absolutely do." The Claire found herself smiling. Their teasing felt natural, comfortable, the kind built over years. Emma turned back toward Claire. "My dad says every old thing deserves another chance." Daniel sighed. "I've said that maybe twice. More like 50 times. Claire looked at him. "I think that's a good philosophy." He smiled. "So do I." Before leaving, Daniel reached into his pocket. He handed Claire a small business card. Ashford High School. Daniel Brooks. History Department. On the back he'd written a phone number. "If you ever need help moving heavy furniture." Claire looked at the card. "I'll pay you." "No." "Pisa." He thought for a moment. "Now we're negotiating." She laughed. "I'll remember that." He pointed toward the cedar chest in her truck. "I'd love to see how that turns out." "You restore furniture." "No. But I appreciate people who do." The Claire tucked the card into her purse. "I'll send you a picture." "I'd like that." The drive home felt different somehow. Claire couldn't quite explain why. She'd spent maybe 30 minutes talking to a stranger. That was all. Yet she realized something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. Not about the future. About another person. It startled her. She wasn't looking for friendship. Certainly not anything more. Her life was finally beginning to settle. She liked the quiet. She liked the routine. She wasn't ready to complicate it. Back at the farmhouse, she unloaded the cedar chest first. One hinge had broken completely. The lid refused to close properly. Someone else would have seen junk. Claire saw potential. As she examined the damaged wood, she remembered Daniel's words. "I've always thought it's nice fixing things instead of replacing them." She smiled to herself. History teacher. She shook her head. Who knew? The following afternoon, Claire was sanding the cedar chest when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. Instead, she answered. "Hello." "Hi." A familiar voice. "It's Daniel." But Claire smiled before she realized she was smiling. "Did you already break the workbench?" He laughed. "Not yet. I've had it less than 24 hours. I figured I'd ask before I made a complete mess of it." "Ask what?" "Our school is hosting the annual Autumn Heritage Festival next weekend." Claire listened. "We invite local craftsmen every year." "I don't think I'm a craftsman." "I think the people who bought your furniture would disagree." She laughed softly. "So," Daniel continued, "would you consider bringing a few pieces?" Claire looked around her workshop, at the projects waiting to be finished, at the cedar chest slowly coming back to life, then out the window toward the quiet fields beyond the farmhouse. "It's been a long time since I said yes to something unfamiliar." There was a gentle pause on the other end. "Maybe it's time." Claire looked down at the worn business card still resting beside her tools. Maybe, just maybe, it was. Claire stared at her phone for a long time after the call ended. "It's been a long time since I said yes to something unfamiliar." She'd meant every word. For 3 years, almost every decision she'd made had been about survival. Keeping the lights on, growing the workshop, making it through another day without looking backward. Now someone had invited her to simply show up. No expectations. No pressure. Just come. She wasn't sure why that felt so intimidating. Saturday morning arrived with crisp autumn air. Claire loaded 6 restored pieces into her pickup. The cedar chest, a pair of walnut end tables, an antique rocking chair, a writing desk, a handcrafted bench. Before climbing into the truck, she paused. What am I nervous about? The answer came almost immediately. Not furniture. Furniture had never betrayed her. Ashford High School looked transformed. The football field had become a festival. Rows of white tents stretched across the grass. Local artists displayed paintings. Farmers sold homemade jams. Blacksmiths demonstrated traditional metalwork. Children laughed while chasing each other between booths. Music drifted through the cool afternoon. Claire parked near the gymnasium. Before she could unload anything, someone waved. Daniel. He walked across the parking lot carrying 2 folding chairs. You came. I almost didn't. I'm glad you did. So am I. He smiled. I saved you a good spot. Should I be worried about what counts as a good spot? It's next to the coffee stand. The Claire laughed. You absolutely picked the best spot. I know. Within half an hour, her booth was ready. Visitors stopped almost immediately. Some admired the craftsmanship. Others simply enjoyed hearing the stories behind each piece. Claire discovered something unexpected. She liked talking about the furniture, not to sell it. To explain it, an older woman pointed toward the cedar chest. It still has the original carving. The Claire nodded. I spent almost a week cleaning around it because I didn't want to damage the detail. The woman smiled. My grandfather used to say old wood remembers every hand that's touched it. Claire smiled back. I think he was right. Around lunchtime, Daniel returned carrying 2 paper cups. I guessed coffee. You guessed correctly. He handed her one. I owe you. You can repay me someday. She looked at him. That's a dangerous sentence. I teach teenagers. I've become immune to dangerous sentences. They both laughed. For a few minutes they watched people wander past without speaking. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. Finally, Daniel nodded toward one of her tables. Business seems good. I've already sold 2 pieces. Congratulations. The Claire looked surprised. You sound genuinely happy about that. I am? Most people would be jealous. Daniel shrugged. I've never understood that. What? Why someone else's success should ruin your day. Claire thought about Ethan. About the business she'd helped build. About how easily he'd taken credit for everything. Daniel interrupted her thoughts. You disappeared for a second. Sorry. Bad memory. She nodded once. I have a few of those. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. Me too. The Claire appreciated that. Some people rushed to fill silence. Daniel seemed willing to let it exist. Later that afternoon, a teenage voice called out, Dad? Emma hurried toward them carrying a paper bag. She stopped in front of Claire. I brought apple cider donuts. Claire smiled. I was hoping someone would. Emma laughed. I knew Dad forgot to eat. I was busy. You always say that. Emma handed Claire a donut. You have to help me. Help you with what? Make sure he eats lunch when he gets distracted. Daniel looked offended. I'm standing right here. I know. Claire laughed harder than she had in months. Emma looked around the booth. You made all of this. I restored most of it. It's amazing. Thank you. Emma ran her fingers gently across the writing desk. My mom loved old furniture. Daniel's smile faded slightly. Claire looked at him. I'm sorry. He gave a small nod. She believed every scratch had a story. Claire quietly answered, I think that's true. Emma smiled. I like you. Daniel looked embarrassed. Emma? What? You don't have to announce everything. I'm just being honest. The Claire laughed. I appreciate honesty. Emma grinned. See? Daniel shook his head. I've already lost this conversation. The festival continued into the evening. By closing time, Claire had sold nearly everything she'd brought. As exhibitors packed their booths, Daniel walked over carrying the workbench he'd won at the auction. Or at least, part of it. One drawer hummed-croaked. The top was covered with fresh pencil marks. Claire folded her arms. You broke it. I improved it. You definitely broke it. He laughed. I need professional advice. She walked around the bench. You replaced the vase. It took me 4 hours. I can tell. That's bad, isn't it? The Claire tried not to smile. It's backwards. Daniel stared at it. You're kidding. I wish I were. He covered his face with one hand. I teach American history. I know. Nobody ever taught me woodworking. Claire burst into laughter, real laughter. The kind that escaped before she could stop it. Daniel looked up. There it is. What? I was wondering when I'd hear you laugh. Claire suddenly became quiet. I haven't done it much lately, I guessed. She looked at the workbench again. I can fix it. I was hoping you'd say that. You'll have to buy me pizza. He smiled. Deal. A week later, Daniel drove to the farmhouse with the workbench in the back of his truck. Emma climbed out carrying 3 pizza boxes. You really weren't joking. Claire laughed. I never joke about pizza. Emma looked around the property. This place is beautiful. It needs work. So does our garage. Daniel smiled. She's not wrong. Claire led them into the workshop. Emma stopped in the doorway. Wow. She slowly turned in a circle. It smells like Grandpa's shed. Daniel smiled softly. I was thinking the same thing. Claire spent the next hour correcting the workbench while Daniel watched closely. See this? She pointed toward the vase. The pressure has to pull toward the bench. That makes sense. It would have made more sense yesterday. And Emma snorted. Daniel looked at her. I've made one mistake. You installed the handles upside down too. I noticed. No, you didn't. I noticed after. Claire laughed again. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Nobody was trying to impress anyone. Nobody was pretending to be perfect. It felt refreshingly normal. After dinner, they carried empty pizza boxes to the porch. The sun dipped below the trees. A cool breeze rustled the leaves. Emma wandered toward the old apple tree with her camera. I'll be back. Daniel watched her go. She's a good kid. You've done well. He looked down. I've mostly guessed. Claire smiled. I think all parents do. He leaned against the porch railing. My wife used to know exactly what to say. Claire stayed quiet. Some days I still expect to hear her come through the front door. He smiled sadly. Then I remember it's been 4 years. Claire looked toward the fields. I understand. He glanced at her. Do you? I still reach for 2 coffee mugs some mornings. Neither spoke for a while. Finally Daniel said, I wasn't looking for new friends. Neither was I, but... Claire nodded. But here we are. He smiled. Here we are. As darkness settled over the farmhouse, Daniel and Emma prepared to leave. Claire walked them to the truck. Emma hugged her without warning. Thanks for today. Claire hugged her back. Come visit anytime. Emma climbed into the passenger seat. Daniel opened the driver's door, then paused. I know this probably sounds strange. Claire waited. I'm glad I lost that auction. She frowned. You won? Exactly? He smiled. If you hadn't let me buy the workbench. He looked toward the warmly lit workshop. I never would have found this place. Claire watched the truck disappear down the gravel driveway. The taillights faded into the darkness. She remained standing on the porch for another minute. The farmhouse didn't feel quite as quiet anymore. Not because someone had filled the silence. Because she'd finally stopped being afraid of it. Inside, her phone buzzed. A news alert from Maple Ridge flashed across the screen. As local buildre in bayano na unc esma ajore expen c own par Jake Claire stared at the headline. For a moment, the piece she'd worked so hard to build wavered. She took a slow breath, then set the phone face down on the kitchen table. Some chapters of her life were finally beginning. Others refused to stay closed. 3 days passed before Claire looked at the news article. It was still sitting in her notifications. She almost deleted it. Instead, she tapped it open. The headline was exactly as she'd remembered. Fasek bien at kayo xdoc perspian dintochrenedus is. There was Ethan, standing in front of a row of employees, smiling confidently. Lily stood beside him, one hand resting on her pregnant stomach. The reporter described Ethan as a businessman whose hard work and determination had transformed a small company into one of the fastest-growing construction firms in the region. Claire quietly closed the article. Not because it hurt, because it erased her. 15 years of bookkeeping, payroll, marketing, customer calls, scheduling, late nights balancing invoices. None of it existed anymore. History had been rewritten. She set the phone down, then walked into the workshop. A customer was arriving in 20 minutes. Real life still needed her. Business continued growing through the rest of October. Claire rarely had an empty week. She restored dining tables, built custom bookshelves, repaired rocking chairs. Even the Ashford Historical Society hired her to restore several antique display cases. One afternoon, Susan stopped by carrying a folder. "You've got another referral." Claire laughed. "I haven't finished the last 3. Susan shrugged. "That's a good problem." Claire opened the folder. Inside were photographs of a century-old church pew. "It was damaged in a flood." Susan nodded. "They specifically asked for you." The Claire looked up. "They did? They've heard you're the woman who brings impossible things back." The Claire smiled. "I don't know about impossible. I do." Susan leaned against the workbench. "You know what your real talent is?" "Woodworking." "No." The Claire frowned. "You never make people feel foolish for caring about old things." That sentence stayed with Claire long after Susan left. Maybe that was true. She understood sentimental value. Some things couldn't be replaced. The following Friday, Daniel called. "You busy tomorrow?" Claire looked at the calendar. "I've got 2 deliveries. What about after lunch?" "I think I'm free." "The Maple Ridge Regional Craft Fair starts tomorrow." Claire hesitated. "Maple Ridge." He heard it immediately. "You don't have to go." Claire walked to the kitchen window. She could almost picture the streets. The grocery store, the library, the house she'd once called home. "I've been avoiding that town," I guessed. "You picked up on that?" "You tense up every time someone mentions it." She sighed. "I don't know if I'm ready." Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "If you're not, that's okay. I hate that it still has this much power. Trauma doesn't disappear because we decide we're tired of carrying it." Claire smiled faintly. "You always sound like a history teacher." "I've accepted my fate." She laughed. "I'll think about it. No pressure." After hanging up, she stood quietly for several minutes. Maybe it was time. Not for Ethan. Not for Lily. For herself. Saturday morning arrived clear and bright. Claire almost turned the truck around twice during the drive. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as familiar streets came into view. Nothing had changed. The bakery still stood on the corner. The old movie theater still advertised films on a hand-painted marquee. Children still rode bicycles through the neighborhood. Life had continued. With or without her. Daniel noticed her silence. "You okay?" "Huh? I don't know." Emma reached over from the back seat and gently squeezed Claire's shoulder. "You don't have to prove anything today." Claire smiled. "Thank you." The craft fair occupied nearly the entire downtown square. Hundreds of visitors wandered between booths. Live music echoed from the gazebo. The smell of barbecue drifted through the air. Claire focused on unloading furniture. Work helped. Work always helped. Within an hour, customers surrounded her booth. A retired couple purchased a restored coffee table. A young mother asked about custom nursery furniture. Business was steady, comforting. Then everything changed. She heard a familiar voice. "Claire." Her body stiffened before she turned. Ethan stood only a few feet away. He looked almost exactly the same. The same confident posture, the same smile. Only it didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. He slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. I wasn't sure it was you, Claire answered calmly. It is. He glanced around the booth. This is impressive. Thank you. I heard you started restoring furniture. I did. You've done well. She nodded politely. So have you. Silence settled between them. People continued browsing nearby, unaware of the history standing in front of them. Finally, Ethan spoke again. I've wanted to call. Why? I don't know. Claire looked at him steadily. I think you do? He lowered his eyes. I guess I wanted to know if you were okay. She almost smiled. You left 3 years ago. I know. I think that question expired. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. A woman's voice interrupted them. Ethan. Lily approached pushing a stroller. Claire's eyes immediately dropped to the little boy sitting inside. Curly brown hair. Bright blue eyes. Tiny sneakers kicking happily against the footrest. He couldn't have been more than 2 years old. He looked around with the curiosity only toddlers possess. Lily stopped walking. Every bit of color drained from her face. Claire. Claire simply nodded. Hello, Lily. No anger. No accusation. Just 2 words. Lily looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. There were faint lines around her eyes Claire didn't remember. The easy confidence she'd once carried had disappeared. She rested one hand on the stroller. This is Noah. Claire looked at the little boy. He smiled at her immediately, then held up a stuffed dinosaur. Claire smiled back. Hi, Noah. He giggled. The sound caught her completely off guard. Children had always done that, made complicated things feel heartbreakingly simple. Lily swallowed. I've wanted to apologize. Claire looked at her. For which part? Lily couldn't answer. The silence stretched. Finally Claire said quietly, I hope he's healthy. Lily blinked. He is? I'm glad. She meant it. No child deserved to inherit the consequences of adult choices. Noah reached toward Claire's display table. His tiny hand landed on a wooden toy truck she'd carved during the winter. I'm sorry, Lily said, pulling him back. Claire picked up the truck. It's okay. She handed it to Noah. His face lit up. Truck. Claire laughed softly. That's right. Lily looked overwhelmed. You don't have to. It's a toy. Noah hugged it tightly. Claire's heart ached in a way she hadn't expected. Not because of Ethan. Not because of Lily. Because this innocent little boy had no idea why the adults around him suddenly looked like they wanted to cry. Daniel walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. He immediately understood the situation. His eyes met Claire's for only a second, a silent question. Are you okay? Claire gave the smallest nod. He stepped beside her naturally, not possessively, simply beside her. This must be the famous coffee. Claire smiled. I certainly hope so. Daniel handed her a cup before turning toward Ethan. I'm Daniel Brooks. Ethan Bennett. They shook hands politely. Emma arrived a moment later. She knelt beside Noah. Hey, buddy. Noah proudly held up the wooden truck. Truck. Emma smiled. That's awesome. Within seconds, she had him laughing. Claire watched the scene quietly. It felt strangely peaceful. Nobody was arguing. Nobody was pretending. Just ordinary people sharing an uncomfortable moment. Ethan looked at Daniel. You two. Daniel glanced toward Claire. We're good friends. Claire noticed Ethan hesitate. Something flickered across his face. Regret. It disappeared almost immediately. But she'd seen it. He looked back at her. I'm glad you're doing well. Claire answered honestly. So am I. Those 4 words surprised both of them. She wasn't saying them to make him jealous. She wasn't pretending. She actually meant them. For the first time since the divorce, she realized she no longer wanted Ethan to see what he'd lost. She simply wanted to keep living the life she'd found. As Ethan and Lily prepared to leave, Noah waved enthusiastically. B. Claire waved back. Bye, Noah. The little boy hugged the wooden truck all the way across the square. Lily looked back once before disappearing into the crowd. Daniel waited until they were gone. You handled that well. Claire exhaled slowly. I wasn't sure I would. You didn't seem angry. I wasn't. She searched for the right words. It was strange. Daniel nodded. I imagine. I kept expecting all the old feelings to come rushing back. And she looked across the busy fairgrounds. I think they've finally started letting go. Daniel smiled. I had a feeling today wasn't really about coming back to Maple Ridge. The Claire looked at him. What was it about? He shrugged. Proving to yourself that your life doesn't live there anymore. Claire followed his gaze toward the road leading out of town. He was right. Somewhere between restoring old furniture, meeting new friends, and laughing again. She'd quietly built a home that no longer existed in Maple Ridge. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, she returned to helping customers. She never noticed Ethan standing at the far end of the street for one last moment before getting into his truck. Watching her laugh with Daniel. Watching strangers admire her work. Watching the woman he'd once believed would never recover. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel victorious. He felt something far heavier, and he couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling that he'd only just begun to understand what he'd really lost. The drive back to Ashford was quieter than the drive there. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Emma had fallen asleep in the back seat before they reached the highway. The wooden toy truck Noah had hugged all afternoon stayed in Claire's thoughts. So did Ethan's face. Not the confident businessman from the television interview. The man she'd seen at the craft fair looked tired, older, as though carrying something heavy. She wasn't happy about that. She wasn't sad either. She simply noticed it, nothing more. Daniel glanced over. You've been quiet? I know. Too much today? Claire smiled faintly. A little. You don't have to talk about it. I think I want to. He nodded. So talk. She looked out the passenger window. I kept imagining I'd feel angry. But you didn't. No. She thought for a moment. I felt finished. Daniel smiled. That's a good word. I think so. Another mile passed before spoke again. I don't forgive what they did. You don't have to. But I don't want to carry it anymore. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. That's different. Claire nodded. I think I'm finally learning the difference. The next morning Claire woke before sunrise. Old habits. She made coffee. Opened the workshop. The smell of cedar greeted her like an old friend. A large dining table waited in the center of the room. Its surface was scarred with decades of family dinners. Knife marks. Water stains. Tiny dents. Claire ran her hand across the wood. Somebody loved you. She smiled. So let's get you ready for a few more generations. She switched on the radio. Soft country music filled the workshop. Hours slipped away unnoticed. Sand measure. Repair. Sand again? By lunchtime, she realized something unusual. She hadn't thought about Ethan once. Business continued growing faster than she expected. By early November, she was booked nearly 2 months in advance. Susan called almost daily. I need another coffee table. I'm still finishing the last one. Good. What? That means people are buying them. Claire laughed. I think you're trying to work me to death. I'm trying to make you successful. I was hoping for a better work-life balance. Susan pretended to think. No. You didn't even hesitate. Because I know you're happiest in that workshop. Claire couldn't argue. She was. A week later, Claire stopped by the library after work to pick up several books on furniture design. Mrs. Harris, the head librarian, smiled as she checked them out. Planning something new? I think so. What kind? I've spent years restoring other people's furniture. Mrs. Harris waited. Claire looked down at the stack of books. I'd like to start building my own. The older woman smiled. That sounds exciting. It also sounds terrifying. The best things usually do. Claire laughed. You sound like Daniel. Mrs. Harris raised an eyebrow. Who's Daniel? Claire immediately felt her cheeks warm. A friend. I didn't ask. You absolutely implied it. Mrs. Harris smiled mischievously. I've worked in libraries for 40 years. And I know exactly when someone says friend differently. The Claire shook her head while laughing. I walked right into that. You certainly did. That Friday evening, Daniel arrived carrying a long cardboard box. Claire opened the front door. What did you buy now? He looked offended. Why does everyone assume I bought something? Because every time you visit, your truck is full. Fair point. He handed her the box. Open it. Inside lay a beautiful set of wood carving chisels. Claire stared. They're gorgeous. I had them sharpened. She looked up. They're old. My grandfather's. Claire's expression changed. Daniel. They've been sitting in my garage for years. I can't take these. I'd rather see them used. She carefully picked one up. The wooden handle was worn smooth. Someone had held it thousands of times. They belong in your workshop. She looked at him. This is a really generous gift. He smiled. They're not a gift. They're not. I'm lending them. For how long? Daniel looked around the workshop. As long as it takes. Claire laughed. That's suspiciously permanent. I thought so too. Emma wandered in carrying a small paper bag. I brought dessert. Claire peeked inside. Apple pie? Baked it myself. Daniel whispered. She's fishing for compliments. I heard that. The Claire took a bite. This is incredible. Emma grinned. I knew you'd tell the truth. Daniel sighed dramatically. I've been saying it's good for weeks. You have to say that. Why? You're my dad. Claire laughed. I think she's got you there. Daniel pointed at both of them. I don't like being outnumbered. You'll survive. I've survived worse. Emma looked at Claire. He once tried assembling a bookshelf without reading the instructions. Daniel groaned. We agreed never to discuss that again. It collapsed. I remember. It collapsed twice. Claire couldn't stop laughing. You two are impossible? Emma smiled. So we've been told. Later that evening, Emma left to photograph the sunset while Daniel helped Claire organize lumber. They worked side by side without speaking much. Boards were measured, stacked, sorted by size. Comfortable silence filled the workshop. Finally, Daniel looked over. Can I ask you something? Depends. She smiled. Go ahead. When was the last time you took a day off? Claire frowned. She counted backwards. I don't know. I thought so. I like working. I know. But you're allowed to enjoy your life too. She leaned against the workbench. I think this is enjoying my life. Daniel nodded. I believe you. He paused. I just don't want your workshop becoming another prison. The words caught her off guard. She looked around slowly. The shelves, the tools, the projects waiting patiently. He was right. She'd escaped one life by burying herself inside another. I hadn't thought about that. I figured. Claire smiled. You notice things. I teach 16-year-olds. You have to. Exactly. The following Sunday, Daniel invited Claire and Susan to lunch at his house. Emma insisted on cooking. It's only grilled cheese. Daniel whispered. Prepare yourself. I can hear you. The Claire laughed. Lunch turned out surprisingly good. Emma proudly announced, nothing burned. Daniel clapped. We're making progress. After eating, they played an old board game Emma had found in a closet. Daniel lost spectacularly. I demand a rematch. But Claire smiled. You've already lost. I refuse to accept history. History teacher. I know. You should know better. Emma burst into laughter. Claire noticed something then. She wasn't visiting someone's house. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't pretending to be okay. She simply was okay. That realization settled quietly inside her. As Claire prepared to leave that afternoon, Daniel walked her to her truck. The late autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke. Leaves crunched beneath their feet. He stood with his hands in his pockets. I've been meaning to tell you something. Claire waited. I look forward to seeing you. She blinked, not because the words were dramatic, because they weren't. They were simple, honest, real. She smiled. I look forward to seeing you too. Neither moved. For several seconds they simply stood there. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt hopeful. Daniel finally spoke. I don't want to rush anything. I know. I just didn't want you wondering. The Claire nodded slowly. Thank you. He smiled. That's enough for today. She climbed into her truck. Halfway home she realized she'd been smiling for nearly 20 minutes. She wasn't falling in love, not yet. But she was doing something she'd promised herself she'd never risk again. She was trusting someone, slowly, carefully. One ordinary conversation at a time. Back at the farmhouse she found an envelope tucked inside her mailbox. There was no return address. Only her name written neatly across the front. Claire carried it inside. She opened it carefully. A single newspaper clipping slid onto the kitchen table. The headline read T series BNT Castar UCTAON UNDER Revido FTR Safi Com PLANT Filen Yumani WDVLOPNTAS. No note, no explanation. Just the article. Claire read the headline twice, then looked toward the dark window above the sink. 3 years ago, news about Ethan would have consumed her. Tonight, she wasn't sure whether she should ignore it or wonder why someone wanted her to see it. Claire turned the newspaper clipping over. Blank. No handwriting. No signature. Nothing to explain why it had been left in her mailbox. She read the headline one more time. SARSB and ETCRUCTO UNDR Review after CFDYs MPAL AI and Feely DONNEWDEV men and Sira at. That was it. No article, just the headline. Someone had carefully cut it out. She folded it once, then slipped it into the kitchen drawer. Whatever was happening in Ethan's life, it wasn't her life anymore. At least, that was what she kept telling herself. The following morning she met Margaret Collins for coffee. Margaret happened to be in Ashford for another client and had called the night before. It's been too long, she'd said. Claire agreed. The cafe overlooked the town square. Margaret smiled as Claire walked in. You look different. Claire laughed. I've been told that. New. Margaret shook her head. I don't mean physically. She studied Claire for a moment. You look lighter. Claire sat down. I think I am. The waitress brought coffee. After a few minutes of catching up, Margaret leaned forward. How's business? Better than I ever imagined. I heard. The Claire smiled. You heard? I have clients in 3 counties. Margaret took a sip of coffee. People talk? I hope they say nice things. They say you're booked for weeks. The Claire laughed. That's true. Margaret smiled. I knew you'd rebuild. The Claire looked down into her coffee. I didn't. Eventually Margaret spoke again. I also heard about Ethan. The Claire raised an eyebrow. So it isn't just gossip. No. Margaret chose her words carefully. The safety complaint is real. The Claire stayed quiet. It doesn't necessarily mean he's done anything wrong. But investigations cost money. Claire nodded slowly. I see. Margaret watched her closely. You don't seem happy about it. I'm not. Surprised. Claire thought for a moment. No. Margaret looked curious. I spent 15 years handling paperwork. Claire folded her hands. Ethan was brilliant at getting work. He wasn't nearly as interested in slowing down. Margaret nodded. So you worried. Constantly. The Claire smiled sadly. I used to remind him to double-check permits, inspect equipment, review contracts. He always said I worried too much. Margaret leaned back. Maybe you didn't. Claire looked out the window. I hope nobody got hurt. So do I. That was the end of the conversation. Neither of them felt the need to say more. Business at the workshop continued at a steady pace. One afternoon, Frank stopped by carrying an old wooden crate. Found this cleaning out my brother's barn. Claire opened it. Inside were dozens of antique hand tools, some rusty, some nearly perfect. She picked up an old marking gauge. "This is beautiful," Frank grinned. "I figured you'd appreciate it." "I do." He looked around the workshop. "You've outgrown this place." The Claire laughed. "I just organized everything. You've outgrown it anyway." She looked around. Projects filled every available corner. Completed furniture waited for pickup. Lumber leaned neatly against every wall. Frank wasn't wrong. "I'm running out of room." He smiled. "That's a good problem." Claire nodded. "It really is." That weekend, Daniel invited Claire and Emma to a small community picnic at Riverside Park. Nothing fancy. Just families sharing food before winter settled in. Claire almost declined. Work still waited in the workshop. Then she remembered Daniel's words. "I just don't want your workshop becoming another prison." She locked the workshop door. The projects could wait one afternoon. Emma spotted Claire first. "You actually came." Claire laughed. "I was told attendance was mandatory." "It was." Emma handed her a paper plate. "Dad's in charge of burgers." The Claire looked toward the grill. "Should I be concerned?" "Only slightly." Daniel overheard. "I make excellent burgers." Emma whispered. "He's lying." Claire laughed. "I heard that. I wanted you to." The afternoon passed easily. Children played football nearby. Neighbors shared homemade desserts. Someone started an impromptu game of horseshoes. Claire couldn't remember the last time she'd simply enjoyed herself without checking the time. At one point, Daniel handed her a bottle of water. "You look relaxed." "I feel relaxed." "I was hoping." Claire smiled. "I think I'm finally learning how." As the sun began to set, Emma wandered off with friends from school. Daniel and Claire found themselves sitting alone on a wooden bench overlooking the river. The water moved slowly. Leaves floated downstream. Daniel broke the silence. "I've been thinking." Claire smiled. "That's usually dangerous." "It usually is." He laughed. "I like spending time with you." She looked at him. "I like spending time with you too. I know we've both been careful." "What?" "We have. For good reasons." Claire nodded. "Very good reasons." Daniel took a slow breath. "I don't want to rush you." "I know. But I also don't want fear making decisions for either of us." The Claire looked out across the river. "When Ethan left?" She stopped. Daniel waited. "I promised myself I'd never trust anyone like that again." He nodded. "That makes sense. I built walls. You built survival." Claire smiled sadly. "Maybe." He turned slightly toward her. "Claire." She met his eyes. "I don't need you to promise forever. I don't even need you to know what this is yet." He smiled gently. "I'd just like to take you to dinner." Claire laughed softly. "We've eaten together." "Pizza in your workshop doesn't count." "It absolutely counts." "I'm aiming slightly higher." She looked at him for several long seconds. Then smiled. "I'd like that." His shoulders relaxed. "I was hoping you'd say yes. So was I." Neither reached for the other's hand. Neither tried to force the moment into something bigger. It felt exactly right. Simple. Honest. Uncomplicated. The following Friday, Daniel picked Claire up just before 6. He wore a charcoal sweater instead of his usual flannel shirt. Emma leaned out the front door as they left. "Be home before midnight." Daniel laughed. 50. Exactly. Claire couldn't stop smiling. Dinner was at a small Italian restaurant in Ashford. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. The kind of place where the owner greeted regular customers by name. Conversation came easily. They talked about books, history, woodworking, travel, embarrassing high school stories. At one point, Daniel admitted, "I failed driver's education the first time." The Claire laughed. "You?" "I hit a traffic cone." 1, 3. She laughed so hard nearby diners smiled in their direction. "You've been carrying that around for 30 years. My students know." "Of course they do. They remind me constantly." Claire wiped away tears of laughter. "I needed this." Daniel smiled. "So did I." After dinner, they walked slowly through downtown Ashford. Storefront lights reflected on the sidewalks. Christmas decorations had begun appearing in windows. Neither seemed in a hurry to end the evening. They stopped outside the old courthouse. Daniel looked up at the clock tower. "I've been wondering something." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What? When did you start smiling again?" She thought about it. The workshop helped. He nodded. "Frank." "Susan." "The library." She smiled. "Emma." Daniel laughed. "She'll be thrilled to hear that." Claire looked at him. "And you?" He didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, "I'm honored." She slipped her hands into her coat pockets. "So am I." Later that night, Daniel walked Claire to her front porch. The farmhouse glowed warmly against the darkness. Neither wanted the evening to end. Daniel smiled. "I had a really good time." "I did too." He hesitated. So. He laughed. "I suddenly forgot how conversations work." Claire laughed with him. "I noticed." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Can I?" He stopped. Claire waited patiently. "Can I see you again?" She smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." He looked relieved. "I've been told overthinking is one of my flaws. I believe it. I'll work on it." She stepped a little closer. "You don't have to fix everything." He smiled. "I'll try to remember that." For a brief moment they simply looked at each other. Then Daniel gently kissed her forehead. Nothing more. No dramatic music. No grand declaration. Just a quiet gesture filled with respect. Claire closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, and he was smiling. "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Daniel." She watched him drive away before going inside. She leaned against the closed front door. Not because she felt overwhelmed. Because she felt hopeful. It had been years since hope had felt safe. As she placed her purse on the kitchen counter, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. Instead, she opened the message. "Be careful. Ethan is looking for you." Escher, no name. No explanation. Just those 6 words. Claire stared at the screen. A chill ran through her. She looked out the kitchen window into the darkness surrounding the farmhouse. Nothing moved. The message could have been a prank, or a misunderstanding, or something far more serious. She locked the front door without quite knowing why, then stood in the quiet kitchen, wondering who had sent the warning, and why Ethan would suddenly be trying to find her after 3 years. If you've been enjoying Claire's journey, I'd love to know what part of her story has resonated with you the most. Your comments help build a wonderful community around these stories. And if you'd like to stay with us through everything that's still to come, consider subscribing. The biggest twists in Claire's life are only just beginning. Claire read the message again before going to bed. "Be careful. Ethan is looking for you." As she clicked on the number. No name. No previous conversation. She considered replying. Instead, she deleted the draft she'd started. If someone genuinely wanted to warn her, they already knew how to reach her. If it was a prank, responding would only encourage it. She placed the phone on her nightstand. Sleep came slowly. The next morning, she mentioned the text to Daniel while they met for coffee before work. He frowned. "Do you think it's real?" "I honestly don't know." "Has Ethan tried contacting you?" "No." "Lily?" "No." Daniel stirred his coffee. "Then maybe it's nothing? Maybe?" He looked at her carefully. "But it bothered you?" Claire nodded. "It did. Because." She looked out the cafe window. "I worked very hard to build a quiet life. And you're afraid that quiet might be ending." She gave a small smile. "You always understand faster than I do. I've had practice." By the time Claire reached the workshop, she had decided on one thing. She wasn't going to let an anonymous message dictate her day. She had work to do. The century-old church pew was waiting. She spent hours replacing damaged joints and matching the original oak grain. Around noon, Frank stopped by carrying sandwiches. "I figured you'd forget lunch." Claire smiled. "I probably would have." He glanced at the half-finished pew. Looking good. Another couple of days. Frank sat on an old stool. You seem distracted. Claire debated telling him. Finally she did. Frank listened without interrupting. When she finished, he shrugged. People love stirring up old stories. You think that's all it is? I don't know. He smiled kindly. But I know worrying about something before it happens never helped anybody. The Claire laughed. Simple. The older I get, the simpler life becomes. Late that afternoon, Claire received another surprise. A white pickup truck pulled into the driveway. The driver climbed out carrying a large envelope. He introduced himself, Mike Sanders. Claire shook his hand. I'm Claire. I own Sanders Custom Homes over in Westfield. I've heard of your company. He smiled. I've heard of yours. He handed her the envelope. Inside were photographs of an enormous walnut conference table. It belonged to my grandfather. The Claire carefully examined the pictures. It was damaged during a warehouse roof collapse. Can you save it? She studied the cracked surface. The split ran almost the entire length. Most restoration experts would have recommended replacing it. Claire looked up. I think so. Mike smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. It won't be quick. I'd rather wait. He looked around the workshop. I visited 3 restoration shops. And they all wanted to replace it. Claire gently touched the photograph. If I can save the original. She smiled. I'd rather do that. Mike nodded. That's exactly why I'm here. After he left, Claire stood quietly. 3 years ago people had known her as Ethan Bennett's wife. Now, successful business owners were driving across counties looking specifically for her. The realization filled her with quiet pride. Not arrogance, just satisfaction. She had built something that belonged entirely to her. Saturday afternoon brought another visit from Daniel and Emma. Emma burst through the workshop door carrying a sketchbook. I need your opinion. Claire looked at the drawings. Furniture designs. Bookshelves. Coffee tables. Reading benches. You drew these? Emma nodded. I've been watching you work. Claire slowly turned each page. These are really good. Emma looked relieved. You mean it? I do. Daniel leaned over. I wasn't allowed to look until today. Emma smiled. I wanted professional feedback. Claire laughed. I'm not sure I'm qualified. You definitely are. Claire pointed toward one design. This reading bench. Emma nodded eagerly. What about it? I think we should build it. Emma's eyes widened. Really? Really? She looked at Daniel. Dad. Daniel smiled. I had a feeling she'd say yes. Emma hugged Claire so quick he almost dropped the sketchbook. Thank you. Claire laughed. You haven't even started yet. I know. I'm just excited. Over the next several hours the workshop became wonderfully chaotic. Claire measured lumber. Emma asked endless questions. Daniel attempted to help. Attempted being the important word. Claire looked over. Daniel. Yes. The measuring tape. What about it? You're reading it upside down. He looked. I was. Emma burst into laughter. I told you. Daniel sighed dramatically. I teach history. Claire smiled. And history is grateful. Even Frank wandered over after hearing the laughter. What'd he do now? Daniel pointed toward the door. I suddenly remember an appointment. Nobody let him leave. By sunset, the basic frame of the reading bench stood proudly in the center of the workshop. Emma ran her hand across the smooth wood. We built this. Claire smiled. We did. Daniel looked at both of them. I think this might be my favorite Saturday in years. Claire quietly agreed. Mine too. Monday morning began with rain. Steady. Cold. Perfect weather for working indoors. Claire spent the morning restoring the church pew before her phone rang. Margaret Collins. Claire answered immediately. Everything okay? I think so. Margaret sounded thoughtful. I received a phone call this morning. From Ethan. Claire stopped sanding. What did he want? He asked if I still represented you. Claire felt her stomach tighten. What did you tell him? The truth. That I don't. Margaret paused. He asked if I'd be willing to pass along a message. Claire waited. I told him I'd ask first. What message? Margaret hesitated. He wants to meet. The workshop suddenly felt very quiet. Claire stared at the rain falling outside. Did he say why? No. Lily. He didn't mention her. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. 3 years. 3 years without asking to meet, without calling, without writing. And now he wanted to talk. I don't know. Margaret spoke gently. You don't owe him anything. I know. But sometimes unanswered questions stay unanswered forever. Claire leaned against the workbench. What would you do? Margaret laughed softly. I'm a lawyer. I know. I don't make life decisions for my clients. Claire smiled. Worth a try. Margaret became serious again. If you decide to meet him... She paused. Don't do it alone. That evening Claire told Daniel about the phone call. They sat on the farmhouse porch watching the rain. He listened quietly. When she finished, he asked only one question. What do you want? I honestly don't know. Then don't answer today. Claire looked at him. You think I should wait? I think you spent 3 years rebuilding your life. He smiled gently. You're allowed to take more than 3 minutes deciding whether someone gets to step back into it. She laughed softly. I like that advice. I was hoping. The rain continued falling across the fields. Neither noticed the dark sedan parked briefly at the end of the gravel road. Its headlights remained off. After less than a minute, it slowly turned around and disappeared back into the night. Claire didn't notice the sedan. Neither did Daniel. The rain hid almost everything beyond the porch light. After a while, Daniel stood. I should get going. Claire walked him to his truck. He smiled. Whatever you decide about Ethan. She looked at him. You don't have to decide tonight. I know. And you don't have to decide alone. She nodded. Thank you. He kissed her forehead gently before climbing into the driver's seat. Claire watched his taillights disappear into the rain. For the first time in years, she knew she had someone she could lean on. Not because she needed rescuing, because she no longer had to carry everything by herself. The following morning dawned cold and gray. Claire unlocked the workshop just after 7. As she rolled up the garage door, she stopped. A small cardboard box sat neatly on the doorstep. No shipping label, no return address. Just her name. She carried it inside. Inside the box was an old leather-bound ledger. Its cover was cracked with age. A note rested on top. I thought this belonged with someone who would appreciate it. No signature. Claire carefully opened the ledger. Her eyes widened. It contained handwritten furniture designs dating back nearly 80 years. Measurements, joinery techniques, hand-drawn sketches. Whoever had owned it had been a master craftsman. Frank wandered in a few minutes later. What have you got there? Claire handed him the book. His eyebrows shot up. I'll be. You recognize it. I think I do. He turned a few pages. This looks like Harold Whittaker's work. The cabinet maker. Frank nodded. He was one of the finest craftsmen this county ever produced. I thought all his journals were lost. So did everybody. Claire gently closed the book. It feels wrong keeping it. Frank smiled. Maybe. Or maybe somebody wanted it to find the right home. For the next week, Claire studied the ledger every evening. She wasn't copying every designs. She was learning from them. Different joints, different proportions. Small details she'd never considered. One sketch caught her attention. A beautiful handcrafted reading chair with curved arms and hidden storage beneath the seat. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Finally, she cleared a corner of the workshop. I'm building this. Not for a customer. For herself. The first piece of furniture she would create entirely from scratch. Emma visited that Saturday. When she saw the drawing pinned above Claire's workbench, She smiled. You're finally doing it. Claire laughed. How did you know? You've been talking about building your own furniture for weeks. Daniel looked at the sketch. That looks complicated. It is. Emma grinned. So you'll definitely try helping. I heard that. You were supposed to. Claire handed Daniel a sanding block. You can help. He looked relieved. I can sand. See. Emma smiled. We've found his talent. Daniel sighed dramatically. My confidence has taken another hit. The Claire laughed. You'll recover. The workshop filled with easy conversation. Emma measured pieces twice before cutting. Daniel carefully sanded each board. Claire assembled the frame. By late afternoon, the chair had begun to take shape. Emma stepped back. It's beautiful already. Claire smiled. It doesn't feel like work. Daniel looked at her. What does it feel like? She thought for a moment. It feels like I've stopped rebuilding. They both looked at her. I'm finally creating. The word surprised even Claire. For 3 years she'd been repairing broken things. Broken furniture, broken finances, broken confidence. This chair wasn't about fixing the past. It was about building the future. The following Tuesday, Susan rushed into the workshop carrying her phone. You need to see this. Claire looked up. What happened? Susan handed her the phone. A local business article filled the screen. Claire frowned. I thought the investigation wasn't finished. It isn't. Suzanne lowered her voice. There are rumors. What kind of rumors? Suppliers haven't been paid. The Claire immediately shook her head. Rumors aren't facts. I know, but people are talking. Claire handed the phone back. I hope people wait until they know the truth. Susan studied her for a moment. You really don't hate him anymore. Claire looked toward the workshop window. Hate takes too much energy. Susan smiled. I wish more people understood that. That afternoon, Margaret called again. I heard from Ethan. Claire closed her eyes briefly. What now? He's still hoping you'll meet him. Did he finally say why? Margaret hesitated. He said there's something you deserve to know. Claire remained silent. Margaret continued. I asked if it had anything to do with the investigation. And he said no. Claire wasn't sure whether that made her feel better or worse. He sounded. Margaret searched for the right word. Desperate. Claire slowly sat down on a stool. That's not like him. I know. No. What did you tell him? I said I'd ask again. Claire rubbed her forehead. I still don't know. Then don't force yourself. I won't. Margaret paused. One more thing. What? He specifically asked if Daniel would be there. Claire frowned. He knows about Daniel. I don't know how, but he asked. After the call ended, Claire sat quietly. She hadn't told many people about Daniel. Ashford wasn't a large town. News traveled quickly. Still, something about the question unsettled her. That evening, Daniel stopped by after work. Claire told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he folded his arms. So he knows about me. It seems that way. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm not worried. I'm not worried either. She smiled faintly. I'm just confused. Daniel walked over to the unfinished reading chair. He ran his hand across the smooth walnut arm. You know what I see? Claire looked at him. What? This chair. She laughed. Very observant. It started as a pile of rough lumber. It did. And every day you made one decision. He pointed to another joint. Not every decision. Just the next one. Claire smiled. I think I know where you're going. I was hoping. He looked at her. You don't have to decide whether to forgive Ethan. You don't have to decide whether to trust him. You don't even have to decide whether you'll ever see him again. He smiled gently. You only have to decide the next right step. Claire let those words settle. The next right step. Not the whole journey, just the next one. It suddenly felt much less overwhelming. Later that night, as Claire locked the workshop, she noticed tire tracks in the damp gravel near the entrance. Fresh. Someone had driven onto the property recently. She frowned. Frank's truck had different tires. Daniel had parked near the house. Susan hadn't visited since lunchtime. Claire followed the tracks to the end of the driveway. They stopped near the mailbox. Whoever had been there hadn't come to the house. They had simply waited. Then left. As she stood looking down at the tracks, her phone rang. Margaret. Claire answered immediately. Did something happen? Margaret's voice was unusually serious. I just received another call from Ethan. What did he say? I asked me to tell you one sentence. Claire's stomach tightened. What sentence? Margaret took a slow breath. He said, tell Claire she's in danger because of something I did. Claire didn't speak. Margaret's words echoed through the quiet night. Tell Claire she's in danger because of something I did. The sentence made no sense. What exactly did he say? I repeated it word for word. Did he explain? No. Did he sound frightened? Margaret hesitated. Honestly. Yes. He sounded like a man who'd run out of time. Claire looked toward the dark driveway. The fresh tire tracks suddenly felt much more unsettling. What should I do? Margaret answered without hesitation. If you believe there's even a small chance this is real, call the sheriff. And Ethan. Let him solve whatever he's involved in. Margaret paused. But don't ignore the warning. Claire locked every door before going to bed. Not because she believed someone was coming. Because she'd rather feel foolish in the morning than careless during the night. Sleep refused to come. Every sound seemed louder. The wind against the windows. Branches brushing the roof. The old farmhouse settling. Just after midnight, she finally drifted off. The next morning, she called Daniel before opening the workshop. I need your opinion. You've got it. She told him everything. He listened quietly. When she finished, he said, I'm coming over. You don't have to. I know. I'm coming anyway. 20 minutes later, his truck pulled into the driveway. He walked slowly around the workshop, around the farmhouse, then toward the mailbox. He crouched beside the tire tracks that were still visible in the damp gravel. These weren't made by Frank's truck. I know. Cool. They're newer than yesterday's rain. Claire folded her arms. What do you think? Daniel stood. I think somebody was here. You don't think I'm imagining it? No. He smiled gently. I also don't think we should panic. What do we do? The sensible thing. An hour later, Deputy Sarah Mitchell parked outside the farmhouse. She listened carefully while Claire explained the anonymous text messages, the newspaper clipping, the box containing the old ledger, the tire tracks, and Ethan's warning through Margaret. Sarah took notes. Has anyone threatened you directly? No. Seen anyone on the property? No. She nodded. I'll file a report. Claire looked disappointed. That's it, for now. Sarah smiled kindly. Claire, most of these events by themselves aren't crimes. I know. But together, they're unusual. Sarah looked around the property. I'll have patrol cars pass through this road more often over the next week. Claire relaxed slightly. Thank you. And if anyone comes onto your property... Sarah handed her a business card. You call me immediately. I will. Business continued despite everything. The large walnut conference table arrived from Westfield. It took 4 men to unload it. Mike Sanders climbed out of the truck. I hope I didn't underestimate this job. Claire walked slowly around the table. The crack stretched almost from one end to the other. It'll be challenging. But... She smiled. I've seen worse. Mike laughed. That's becoming my favorite sentence. Claire ran her fingers across the walnut surface. This table deserves another generation. Mike nodded. My grandfather would agree. As the delivery crew left, Claire noticed something. Working still calmed her. The questions surrounding Ethan hadn't disappeared. but they no longer controlled every thought. The table in front of her needed attention. That was enough for today. That evening, Emma stopped by after school. She found Claire studying the old craftsman's ledger. "I love this drawing." The Claire looked over. Emma pointed to a delicate writing desk hidden among the sketches. "It's beautiful." "It is." Emma smiled. "You should build it." Claire laughed. "I've already started one project. So I need to finish it first." And Emma shrugged. "I think Grandpa would have started both." Daniel looked up from sweeping the workshop floor. "You never met your grandfather." "I've heard stories." "I was trying to save Claire from herself." Emma grinned. "Too late." The Claire laughed. "I appreciate the confidence." As the afternoon faded, Frank arrived carrying fresh apple cider. He looked at Daniel. "You staying for dinner?" Daniel glanced toward Claire. "If that's okay." Claire smiled. "Of course." Frank nodded approvingly. "Good." Nobody questioned the answer. Somehow dinners together had become normal. Not planned. Just expected. They ate on the farmhouse porch while the sun disappeared behind the trees. Conversation drifted from football to local history to Emma's latest photography project. For nearly 2 hours, nobody mentioned Ethan. Nobody mentioned anonymous messages. Nobody mentioned danger. Claire realized something. This ordinary evening. This was the life she'd fought so hard to build. After Frank and Emma left, Daniel stayed behind to help wash the dishes. Claire smiled. "You don't have to." "I know. You seem to say that a lot." "Because it's important." He dried another plate. "I don't do these things because I have to." He looked at her. "I do them because I want to." Claire smiled. "I've never been very good at accepting help." "I noticed." "I'm trying." "I noticed that too." They shared a quiet laugh. Daniel was about to leave when headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Both of them turned. A dark SUV rolled slowly toward the house. It stopped several yards away. Neither Claire nor Daniel recognized it. The driver's door opened. A man in his late 50s stepped out wearing a dark overcoat. He removed his hat politely. "Ems. Bennett." Claire took one cautious step forward. "Yes. My name is Richard Hale." His voice was calm but serious. "I've been trying to find you for several days." Daniel subtly moved closer to Claire. Richard noticed. "I understand your caution." He reached slowly into his coat pocket. Daniel tensed. Instead of a weapon, Richard produced a business card. Claire looked at it. "That's Richard Hale, senior claims investigator." She frowned. "What does an insurance investigator want with me?" Richard met her eyes. "I'm investigating the Bennett construction development." Claire's expression hardened. "I don't have anything to do with that anymore." "I know." He nodded once. "But I believe you may know something." He paused. "That could explain why someone has been trying so hard to find you." Richard Hale kept a respectful distance. He noticed Daniel standing beside Claire. "I apologize for arriving unannounced." Claire folded her arms. "You've certainly chosen an unusual time." "I know." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I would have preferred calling first." "Then, why didn't you?" "I couldn't find a phone number." Claire glanced at Daniel before looking back at the investigator. "What exactly do you want?" Richard held out the business card again. "I'm not here on behalf of Bennett Construction. I'm here on behalf of the company's insurance carrier." Claire studied the card for another moment before slipping it into her pocket. 5 minutes. Richard nodded. "That's all I need." The three of them moved onto the farmhouse porch. Daniel remained quietly beside Claire. Richard seemed to appreciate that. He sat in one of the wooden chairs and removed a small notebook. "I'll start with the important part." He looked directly at Claire. "Nobody believes you've done anything wrong." Claire frowned. "I wasn't aware anyone thought I had." "They don't." Richard smiled politely. "But your name keeps appearing." "In what?" "Interviews." She blinked. Whose interviews? Former employees. Claire exchanged a confused look with Daniel. Richard continued. Several people have told us that while you were involved with Bennett Construction, safety standards were much stricter. Claire leaned back slowly. I handled paperwork. You handled much more than paperwork. He flipped through his notes. You reportedly insisted on permit reviews, equipment inspections, insurance renewals, training records. Claire sighed. I reminded Ethan. Richard nodded. And according to everyone we've interviewed. He listened. She looked away. At least he used to. Daniel finally spoke. What changed? Richard closed the notebook. That's what we're trying to understand. He turned back toward Claire. Do you remember when the company began expanding rapidly? She answered immediately. About 4 years before the divorce. Did anything change inside the business? Claire thought carefully. Ethan started hiring more project managers. He traveled constantly. There was more pressure. She paused. And? Richard waited. He became impatient. What do you mean? He hated delays. Claire looked toward the workshop. If I told him a permit wasn't ready, he'd ask whether we could start preparing the site anyway. Sometimes I'd argue with him. Richard nodded slowly. Did he usually listen? Eventually. She stopped speaking. Then another memory surfaced. Actually, Richard looked up. What? There was one manager. Who? Greg Lawson. The name seemed to catch Richard's attention. You remember him? Claire nodded. He joined during the expansion. What was he like? Ambitious. She frowned. And he and Ethan became very close. Richard wrote the name down. Did you trust him? Claire didn't answer immediately. No. Why not? He always wanted shortcuts. A silence settled over the porch. Finally, Richard spoke again. Ems. Bennett. I need to ask something difficult. The Claire nodded. Go ahead. Did Ethan ever sign paperwork without reading it? The Claire almost laughed. More times than I could count. Richard's expression didn't change. I was afraid you'd say that. Daniel leaned forward. Why? Richard took a slow breath. The current investigation isn't centered on one accident. And Claire felt her stomach tighten. It isn't. New. He looked between them. We've discovered several construction sites where inspection records appear inconsistent. Inconsistent how? Dates don't match. Signatures don't match. Some inspections may never have happened. Claire stared at him. You think someone forged them? We're considering that possibility. Claire stood and walked to the porch railing. A cold breeze moved through the trees. Her mind drifted back years. Late nights in the office. Stacks of paperwork. Greg rushing into Ethan's office. Conversation stopping whenever she entered. She had ignored it. She'd assumed it was business. Hadn't she? Richard interrupted her thoughts. Did you remember something? She turned slowly. I remember disagreeing with Greg. What about? He kept saying paperwork slowed projects down. Richard nodded. And Ethan? He usually tried to keep the peace. Claire frowned. But toward the end, she closed her eyes briefly. He stopped asking my opinion. Richard remained quiet. He wasn't pushing. He simply waited. Claire appreciated that. Finally, she spoke again. I left before any of this. I know. You understand that. I do. Then why am I important? Richard answered honestly. Because you knew how the company operated before everything changed. He looked at the workshop. You're one of the last people who saw the transition happen. Claire slowly sat back down. I don't know how much help I'll be. You might remember something everyone else overlooked. After nearly an hour, Richard stood. I won't take any more of your evening. Claire walked him toward his SUV. He paused before opening the driver's door. One more thing. She waited. If Ethan contacts you. Richard hesitated. Please let me know. Claire looked puzzled. You think he's hiding? I don't know. but several people involved in this investigation have become difficult to reach. The sentence lingered in the air. Richard tipped his hat politely. "Thank you for your time." Then he drove away. The porch felt strangely quiet after the SUV disappeared. Daniel leaned against the railing. "What are you thinking?" Claire answered truthfully. "I spent 3 years believing my past was over. And now, it feels like it's knocking on my door." Daniel nodded. "I can understand that." She looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. If this gets messy." She hesitated. "If reporters start asking questions. If people start talking one." She struggled to finish the sentence. Daniel smiled gently. "You think I'll leave?" She lowered her eyes. "I don't know." He stepped closer. "Claire?" She looked up. "I watched you spend an entire afternoon helping a little boy whose existence represented the worst day of your life." His voice remained calm. "I've watched you rebuild furniture everyone else wanted to throw away. I've watched this entire town trust you." He smiled. "I'm not worried about gossip." Emotion caught in Claire's throat. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "I know." He laughed softly. "I've been saying that a lot lately." "You have." The next morning Claire unlocked the workshop before sunrise. The unfinished reading chair stood exactly where she'd left it. She ran her hand across the smooth walnut. Then she noticed something. A folded piece of paper rested on the workbench. She frowned. She was certain it hadn't been there the night before. Daniel had returned. Frank never entered without calling out. Slowly, she unfolded it. Only one sentence was written across the page. "You already know who changed the inspection records. You just haven't remembered yet, das Gersh." Claire read the note 3 times. You already know who changed the inspection records. You just haven't remembered yet." Her heart began to race. She looked around the workshop. Everything else appeared exactly as she'd left it. The doors were still locked. The windows were secure. Nothing had been moved. Only the note. She carefully picked it up by the edges. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, carrying 2 coffees. He immediately noticed her expression. "What happened?" Without speaking, Claire handed him the paper. He read it once. Then again. "You didn't leave this." She shook her head. "No." He walked slowly around the workshop. The back door was still bolted. The windows were latched from the inside. Finally, he stopped beside the front entrance. "Whoever left this either had a key," he looked at Claire, "or got in before you locked up yesterday." The Claire folded her arms tightly. "I don't like either possibility." "Neither do I." Deputy Sarah Mitchell arrived within the hour. She photographed the note before placing it into an evidence bag. "I'll have it checked for fingerprints." Claire nodded. "I know there probably won't be any." "Probably not." Sarah smiled reassuringly. "But we're going to treat this seriously." She walked through the workshop, taking pictures. "Has anyone besides family and close friends been inside recently?" Claire thought about it. Customers usually stay near the entrance. "What about deliveries?" "A few." Sarah wrote everything down. Then she stopped beside the old leather ledger. "Where did this come from?" Claire explained about the anonymous box. Sarah frowned. "So someone has now sent you 3 anonymous items. The newspaper clipping, the ledger, and this note." Claire nodded. Sarah closed her notebook. "I don't think that's a coincidence anymore." After the deputy left, the workshop felt unusually quiet. Claire looked at the unfinished reading chair. Normally working settled her nerves. Today she couldn't focus. Every sound made her glance toward the door. Daniel noticed. "You're forcing yourself. I have orders to finish. You also haven't taken a full breath in 20 minutes." Claire laughed softly. "I hadn't realized." "I had." He gently took the sanding block from her hand. "Come on. We're going for a walk. In the middle of the workday." "Exactly." Claire smiled. I've created a monster. I learned from the best. They walked along the trail beside Ashford Lake. The trees had turned shades of gold and crimson. Leaves drifted across the path with every breeze. Neither hurried. Daniel finally spoke. Can I tell you what I think? Always. I think someone wants your attention. Claire looked at him, but not necessarily to hurt me. Exactly. He picked up a fallen maple leaf. If someone wanted to harm you. He shrugged. They probably wouldn't keep sending puzzles. The Claire considered that. So why the notes? I don't know. But whoever it is wants you to remember something. The Claire sighed. I wish I knew what. That evening she searched through several old storage boxes she'd brought from Maple Ridge years earlier. Most contained photographs, tax records, holiday decorations. Then she found a cardboard file marked DeFrost Bennett Construction. Archivist, she smiled sadly. I forgot I even kept this. Inside were old employee newsletters, company picnic photos, Christmas party invitations. As she sorted through them, one photograph caught her attention. It showed the office staff gathered around a conference table. Ethan stood in the center. Greg Lawson stood beside him. Claire recognized everyone. Then she noticed someone she'd almost forgotten. A young administrative assistant. Quiet. Always taking notes. Her name escaped Claire. She turned the photo over. Someone had written names on the back. H. Emily Carter. Claire frowned. She remembered Emily now. She'd only worked there about a year. Then she'd suddenly resigned. At least, that's what everyone had said. Hadn't they? The following morning Claire drove to the Ashford Library. Mrs. Harris looked up from the circulation desk. Good morning. I need a favor. You've come to the right place. Claire held up the old company newsletter. Can I use the newspaper archives? Mrs. Harris smiled. Research project. Something like that. Within minutes Claire sat in front of a computer, scrolling through archived editions of the Maple Ridge Gazette. She searched for Bennett Construction. Dozens of articles appeared. Business awards. New contracts. Community donations. Then, a tiny article buried deep inside the local news section. A Sears administrative employee injured in traffic collision. Claire clicked it. Emily Carter had been involved in a serious car accident while driving home from work. She survived, but according to the article, she never returned to Bennett Construction. Claire leaned back. Something about it bothered her. Not the accident. The timing. She searched the date. Emily's accident had happened 2 days after a heated meeting Claire remembered having with Greg about missing inspection paperwork. Claire stared at the screen. No, she whispered it without realizing. Mrs. Harris looked over. Everything all right? Claire nodded automatically. I think so. But she wasn't sure. Not anymore. That afternoon Richard Hale called. I hope I'm not interrupting. No. I wanted to update you. Claire sat at her workbench. Did you learn anything? Well, I identified another former employee. Claire's grip tightened on the phone. Emily Carter. Richard fell silent. How did you know that name? Claire slowly looked toward the old company photograph lying on her desk. I remembered her. Richard exhaled. Mems Bennett. What? We've been trying to locate Emily for almost 3 weeks. Claire's stomach tightened. Have you found her? No. Richard's voice became more serious. But after hearing you say her name. He paused. I think your memories may be much more important than either of us realized. Claire ended the call feeling unsettled. She walked outside as the sun dipped below the horizon. The fields were quiet. The farmhouse stood peacefully behind her. This was the life she'd built. Yet somehow, the answers to everything happening now seemed buried in a life she'd believed she'd left behind. As she turned to go back inside, headlights appeared at the end of the gravel road. This time they didn't stop. The vehicle drove slowly past the farmhouse. Claire couldn't see the driver, but she did notice one thing. The same distinctive tread pattern that Deputy Mitchell had photographed from the fresh tire tracks outside her workshop. Claire remained perfectly still. The vehicle rolled past the farmhouse without slowing down. It disappeared around the bend. Only after the taillights vanished did she breathe again. She looked down at the gravel road. The tires had left fresh impressions. The same wide tread, the same unusual pattern. This time she wasn't imagining it. Someone had returned. The next morning, Deputy Sarah Mitchell arrived before Claire even called. "I was already driving this road." Claire pointed toward the fresh tracks. "They came back." Sarah crouched beside them. "They did." She compared photographs from her phone with the new impressions. "They're definitely the same tires." Claire folded her arms. "Can you identify the vehicle?" "Not yet." Sarah stood. "But whoever it is, eh?" She looked toward the road. "They're becoming more confident." That sentence stayed with Claire all morning. More confident. Why? Later that afternoon, Richard called again. "We found Emily Carter." Claire nearly dropped the phone. "Is she all right?" "Yes." Relief washed over Claire. "Where is she?" "She moved to Oregon several years ago." "Did you speak with her?" "I did." Claire waited. "She agreed to meet." "With you?" Richard hesitated. "With both of us." Claire frowned. "Me?" "She specifically asked for you." Claire looked across the workshop. "She remembers me." "She remembers me." Richard's tone became thoughtful. "She said you were the only person in that office who ever listened to her." Claire searched her memory. Emily had been quiet, hardworking, always nervous. "I barely remember working with her." Richard spoke gently. "She remembers more than you do." Daniel arrived just before closing time. Claire told him about Emily. He listened carefully. "So she wants to meet, apparently. When?" "This weekend." Daniel smiled. "I think you should go." Claire nodded slowly. "I think so too." He looked at her. "Do you want company?" "I wasn't sure if I should ask." "You don't have to." Claire laughed. "There, you go again. I'm consistent. I've noticed." She smiled. "I'd like you to come." "I'd be happy to." Saturday morning they drove to Maple Ridge. Not downtown. Instead, Richard had arranged to meet at a quiet cafe just outside the city. Claire recognized the building immediately. It had once been an old train station. Now it was a small restaurant. Richard stood as they entered. Emily was already seated. Claire almost didn't recognize her. Her dark hair had streaks of silver now. Thin reading glasses rested on the table. But her eyes, Claire remembered those. Kind, careful. Emily stood. "Claire." Claire smiled uncertainly. "Emily." For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Emily stepped forward and hugged her. "I'm so glad you're okay." Claire hugged her back. "You too." They sat. Coffee arrived. Nobody seemed eager to begin. Finally Richard broke the silence. "Emily." She nodded. "I know." She turned toward Claire. "I've wanted to apologize." Claire blinked. "For what?" "I should have called you." "When I left." Claire frowned. "I thought you resigned." Emily looked surprised. "That's what Greg told everyone." Claire felt a chill. "You didn't resign." Emily slowly shook her head. "I was fired." Silence filled the table. Claire stared at her. "Why?" Emily laughed bitterly. "Because I asked too many questions." And Emily opened her handbag. She removed an old notebook. "I kept notes." Claire looked confused. "You kept notes?" "I was the administrative assistant." Emily smiled sadly. "I wrote everything down." She opened the notebook. Meeting dates, project names, employee schedules. Then one page caught Claire's attention. Written across the top were the words "R's inspection files, missing." Claire leaned forward. "I remember this." Emily nodded. "I knew you would." She pointed to a date. 3 weeks before my accident. Claire looked closer. Several inspection reports had disappeared from the office. She remembered searching for them. She'd blamed herself. "I thought I'd misplaced them." "You didn't." Emily's voice was firm. I watched Greg take them. Claire looked up. Why didn't you tell me? I tried. The Claire froze. Emily smiled sadly. You were leaving for that contractor meeting. Another memory surfaced. Emily standing outside Claire's office, holding a folder. Claire saying, "We'll talk tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. Emily's accident happened that evening. Claire closed her eyes. Oh my God. I forgot. Emily reached across the table. It wasn't your fault. I forgot. You had no reason to think anything terrible was happening. Claire looked at the notebook again. More memories surfaced. Greg insisting on collecting paperwork himself. Inspection reports disappearing. Late night meetings. Ethan becoming impatient whenever Claire asked questions. Daniel quietly placed his hand over Claire's. Not to interrupt. Just to remind her she wasn't alone. Richard carefully turned another page. Emily. She nodded. There's one more thing. She looked directly at Claire. The day I was fired, Wani. She swallowed. I overheard Greg arguing with Ethan. Claire leaned forward. What did they say? I couldn't hear everything. Emily took a slow breath. But I clearly heard Greg say. She looked from Claire to Richard. If Claire ever figures out what we've been doing, she'll shut the whole company down. The cafe fell completely silent. Claire stared at Emily. One thought echoed louder than every other. Greg hadn't been afraid of Ethan. He'd been afraid colors of Claire. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The noise of the cafe seemed to fade into the background. Claire stared at the notebook lying open on the table. Greg's words echoed in her mind. If Claire ever figures out what we've been doing, she'll shut the whole company down. She looked at Emily. You're certain that's what he said? Emily nodded without hesitation. I've replayed that conversation in my head for years. Richard closed the notebook carefully. This changes the timeline. The Claire looked at him. How? We believed the safety problems started after your divorce. He shook his head. They may have started while you were still working there. Claire leaned back in her chair. I was in that office every day. Richard answered gently, which is probably why they worked so hard to keep you away from certain decisions. Daniel finally broke the silence. Did Ethan know? Richard looked at Emily. Emily looked down at her coffee. I honestly don't know. Claire frowned. You were there. I was. Emily sighed. Some days Ethan argued with Greg. Other days. She hesitated. He signed whatever Greg put in front of him. Richard nodded slowly. That's consistent with what we've been finding. The Claire rubbed her temples. So either Ethan was involved, or he stopped paying attention. Nobody disagreed. They spent another hour reviewing Emily's notebook. Most of the entries were ordinary. Delivery schedules, employee birthdays, meeting reminders. Then Richard stopped on one page. What's this? A name had been circled several times. Eve Harbor Ridge Development. Claire's heart skipped. I remember that project. Richard looked up. It was one of the company's biggest contracts. Claire nodded. I spent weeks preparing the paperwork. She frowned. But Daniel noticed immediately. What? Claire closed her eyes. I never saw the final inspection file. Richard leaned forward. Are you sure? I remember asking Greg for it. And he told me he'd already mailed everything. Emily shook her head. He told me the same thing. Richard slowly closed the notebook. I don't think he mailed anything. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Emily hugged Claire before leaving. I'm sorry it took me so long. Claire hugged her back. We both survived. Emily smiled. That's what matters. As Emily drove away, Claire stood quietly beside Daniel. So many years, she whispered. I kept thinking I'd missed something. Daniel looked at her. You did. Claire frowned. What? You trusted people. She looked at him. That's not a flaw. It felt like one. He gently shook his head. No. The flaw belongs to the people who abused that trust. On the drive home, Claire barely spoke. Pieces of memory surfaced one after another. Greg insisting on handling permits himself. Late-night phone calls Ethan always took outside, boxes of files disappearing during the office renovation. Small moments she dismissed at the time. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they painted a very different picture. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel. I think you're remembering. I am buoyant. It's exhausting. She nodded. It's like finding pieces of a photograph I didn't know had been torn apart. Back in Ashford, Claire unlocked the workshop. The unfinished reading chair waited exactly where she'd left it. She smiled faintly. No mysteries here. She picked up a chisel. The familiar rhythm steadied her breathing. Measure. Carve. Test the fit. Adjust. Daniel watched quietly. I've noticed something. What? When you're working, She looked up. You stop looking over your shoulder. Claire smiled. I suppose I do. The workshop still feels safe. She rested her hand on the walnut chair. I intend to keep it that way. The peaceful afternoon didn't last. Just before 5 o'clock, Richard's number appeared on her phone. His voice was unusually tense. We have a problem. Claire immediately stopped working. What happened? Greg Lawson. What about him? We've been trying to locate him. And? Richard paused. We've found his house. Claire's stomach tightened. Was he there? No. The neighbors haven't seen him for almost a week. Claire looked at Daniel. He disappeared. It appears so. Richard lowered his voice. And someone entered his home before we did. Claire felt a chill. What was taken? Every company file. Silence filled the workshop. Richard continued. Computers. Boxes. Paper records. Everything. Claire slowly sat down. So someone is cleaning up. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Before Claire could respond, Richard added one final sentence. And according to one of the neighbors, He took a slow breath. The last person they remember seeing at Greg's house was Ethan Bennett. Claire lowered the phone slowly. The workshop felt unusually still. Daniel watched her carefully. What did Richard say? Claire looked at him. They can't find Greg. Daniel frowned. I thought they were interviewing him. So did I. She swallowed. His house was emptied. Completely. And neighbor. She hesitated. A neighbor says Ethan was the last person seen there. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally he asked, Do you believe that? Claire stared at the unfinished reading chair. I don't know what I believe anymore. That night Claire couldn't settle. She tried reading. She tried working on the chair. Nothing held her attention. Every new piece of information seemed to create 2 more questions. If Ethan was involved, why had he tried so hard to warn her? If he wasn't, why was he looking for Greg? She finally closed the workshop early. Some answers refused to appear simply because you kept chasing them. The following morning Richard called again. I've spoken with the sheriff. Claire waited. They're officially treating Greg Lawson as a missing person. So it's no longer just an investigation. New. Richard sounded tired. It's becoming something much bigger. Claire looked toward the fields. What do you need from me? For now. Nothing. He paused. But I'd like you to be careful. Claire almost smiled. I'm hearing that a lot lately. I'm serious. So am I. Business refused to slow down. Customers continued arriving. The conference table demanded nearly all of Claire's attention. Mike Sanders stopped by to check the progress. He walked slowly around the massive walnut table. I honestly didn't think anyone could save this. Claire smiled. It still has another week. It's already beautiful. She ran her hand along the repaired seam. You can still see where it broke. Mike nodded. I like that. Claire looked surprised. You do. My grandfather used to say repaired things tell the truth. She smiled. I've heard something similar. Mike laughed. Then your grandfather was probably wiser than mine. Later that afternoon, Emma arrived with her camera. "I need volunteers." Claire looked up from sanding. "For what?" "My photography project." Daniel walked in carrying groceries. "I've made a terrible mistake." Emma grinned. "You volunteered yesterday. I didn't realize there would be posing." "There isn't." Claire laughed. "There absolutely is." Within minutes, Emma had them standing outside beneath the old oak tree. "Closer." Daniel took one small step. "Closer." Claire laughed. "We're going to fall over." Emma smiled. "Perfect." She snapped several photographs. "Now look at each other." Daniel immediately looked away. Emma lowered the camera. "Dad, I'm trying." Claire couldn't stop laughing. Emma shook her head dramatically. "You teach history in front of hundreds of students." "I do. But this is different." "How?" "I actually care how this goes." The words slipped out before he realized he'd... Silence followed. Claire looked at him. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "I wasn't planning to say that out loud." Claire smiled warmly. "I'm glad you did." Emma quietly lifted the camera. Click. Neither of them noticed. That evening, Emma showed Claire one of the photographs. It captured a simple moment. Claire laughing, Daniel looking at her instead of the camera. Neither posed. Neither performed. Claire smiled. "I like this one." Emma nodded. "So do I." "Why?" "Because nobody's pretending." Claire looked at the image again. She realized Emma was right. For years she'd spent enormous energy pretending. Pretending she wasn't hurt. Pretending she wasn't lonely. Pretending she was fine. Now, she didn't have to pretend anything. The next morning, Claire received an unexpected visitor. Ethan. He stood beside his truck near the entrance to the property. He didn't approach the workshop. He simply waited. Claire stepped outside. Daniel happened to be inside organizing lumber. He noticed Ethan immediately but stayed where he was. Claire stopped several yards away. "What are you doing here?" Ethan looked exhausted. His clothes were neat. His face wasn't. Dark circles framed his eyes. "I needed to see you." "I told Margaret I wasn't ready." "I know." He nodded. "I'm sorry." Claire remained silent. He looked around before speaking again. "I don't have much time." Her expression hardened. "What does that mean?" "It means people are watching me." Claire frowned. "Ooh, I don't know. But every time I try to talk to someone, load." He glanced toward the road. "Someone seems to know." Claire remembered the anonymous notes. The vehicle. The tire tracks. "You sent the warning." He nodded. "Yes." The text message. "Yes." The newspaper clipping. "Yes." Claire stared at him. The ledger. Ethan looked confused. "What ledger?" She studied his face carefully. He wasn't pretending. "You didn't send the old woodworking journal?" "No." "The note in my workshop." "What note?" Claire slowly realized something. Someone else had been trying to communicate with her. Someone Ethan knew nothing about. Ethan took a careful step forward. "I made mistakes, Claire." She said nothing. "I made more than mistakes." His voice cracked. "I stopped listening to you." She looked away. "I know. I thought rapid growth meant success. I know. I trusted the wrong people." Claire met his eyes again. "Greg." He nodded once. "I should have seen what he was doing." "Did you?" He hesitated. "Not at first. And later. I ignored things I shouldn't have ignored." The honesty surprised her. She asked quietly, "Why now?" Ethan looked toward the workshop. "Because someone is trying to make sure none of us ever tell the truth." Before Claire could respond, a pickup truck sped past the entrance far faster than any vehicle normally traveled on the gravel road. Both Claire and Ethan turned instinctively. The truck never slowed. But as it passed, Claire noticed the tires. The same distinctive tread pattern she'd seen outside her workshop. The same pattern Deputy Mitchell had photographed. Ethan's face lost all color. He whispered only 2 words. "They found me." Then, without another explanation, he hurried back to his truck and drove away in the opposite direction. Claire stood frozen in the driveway. Daniel walked out beside her. What just happened? Claire never took her eyes off the road. I think. She spoke slowly. Whoever has been watching me. She looked in the direction the speeding truck had disappeared. Has been watching Ethan too. Daniel stood beside Claire until the sound of Ethan's truck disappeared. Neither of them spoke. The gravel road was empty again. Only the settling dust remained. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. You believe him? Claire looked down the road. I believe he was frightened. That's different. She nodded. It is. They walked back toward the workshop. Claire stopped halfway. I never thought I'd see Ethan afraid. Daniel answered quietly. Neither did he. Inside, the familiar smell of walnut and cedar helped steady Claire's thoughts. She picked up a chisel, set it back down. Her hands weren't ready for careful work. Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee. I keep thinking about something. Claire accepted the mug. What? Ethan admitted to sending the text message. And the newspaper clipping. But not the ledger. The Claire nodded. Or the note in the workshop. Daniel leaned against the workbench. So there are 2 different people trying to reach you. The Claire frowned. One wants to warn me. The other wants me to remember. Neither explanation felt complete. An hour later, Deputy Sarah Mitchell arrived. Richard Hale had already called her. Claire described Ethan's visit from beginning to end. Sarah wrote quickly. He admitted sending the anonymous text. Wes. And the newspaper clipping. Wes. Sarah looked up, but denied leaving the ledger. Claire nodded. I believed him. Sarah closed her notebook. So do I. Claire looked surprised. You do. Ethan confessed to the things he actually did. Sarah shrugged. People who are lying usually claim credit for everything or deny everything. He did neither. Daniel glanced at Claire. That's what I was thinking. Sarah stood. If Ethan contacts you again, I'll let you know. And don't meet him alone. The Claire smiled faintly. I've been given that advice before. This time it's an official instruction. By late afternoon, Richard pulled into the driveway. He carried a thick folder. I thought you should see this. They gathered around the large conference table in the workshop. Richard spread several photographs across the surface. Construction sites, construction reports, equipment logs. One picture immediately caught Claire's attention. She pointed. That's Harbor Ridge. Richard nodded. It is. Claire looked closer. Something about the image bothered her, not the building. The temporary site office. She leaned in. Can you enlarge this? Richard handed her a magnifying sheet. Claire studied the photograph for nearly a minute. Then she froze. What is it? Daniel asked. Claire pointed toward a white pickup parked beside the trailer. Those tires. Richard frowned. What about them? Claire looked up. I've seen them. Daniel immediately understood. The gravel road. Claire nodded. The tread pattern. Richard compared the photograph with the pictures Deputy Mitchell had taken. Nobody spoke. Finally, he whispered, I think you're right. The truck parked at Harbor Ridge years earlier had the same distinctive tire pattern that had appeared outside Claire's farmhouse. Richard immediately called Sarah. Within an hour, she arrived with printed comparison photographs. She placed them side by side. The spacing matches. The outer shoulder matches. She looked at Claire. I can't prove it's the same truck, but it's the same model of tire. Richard folded his arms. Can we identify who drove it? Sarah shook her head. Not from this. But Claire kept staring at the photograph. Then another memory surfaced. Not of Greg. Not of Ethan. Someone else. A man who seemed to appear at every major construction site. Quiet. Middle-aged. Never spoke much. She closed her eyes. I know that truck. Richard looked up. You remember the driver? I remember. She struggled. A maintenance contractor. What was his name? I can't. She pressed her fingers against her temples. I can see his face. but I can't remember his name. That evening, Emma stopped by after school. She immediately sensed the mood. What happened? Daniel smiled gently. We're solving old mysteries. Emma looked at the photographs spread across the table. Her camera still hung around her neck. Without saying anything, she picked up one of the enlarged construction photos. She studied it carefully. Then another. Then another. Finally, she frowned. Can I ask a strange question? Richard nodded. Please. Emma pointed toward the background of one photograph. Has anyone looked at the reflections? Everyone turned toward her. The reflections. She nodded. In the trailer window. Richard leaned closer. Claire picked up the magnifying sheet again. The reflection was faint, barely visible. But there, standing beside Greg Lawson, was another man. Only part of his face could be seen. Daniel looked at Emma. How did you even notice that? She shrugged. Photography. I spend half my life looking at reflections and shadows. Richard carefully photographed the image with his phone. This might be nothing. Emma nodded. It might, but it looked important. Claire smiled proudly. It was. After everyone left, the farmhouse felt unusually peaceful. Claire and Daniel sat on the porch. The stars were bright overhead. Daniel looked toward the workshop. You know something? What? A few months ago, the building represented survival. Claire smiled. And now? It represents your future. She rested her head lightly against the back of the porch swing. I think you're right. Daniel reached over and gently took her hand. This time, neither of them hesitated. Claire looked down at their hands intertwined. It felt natural, comfortable, safe. After a long silence, she smiled. I think I'd like to stop calling this dating. Daniel laughed softly. What would you rather call it? She looked at him. Our life. His smile widened. I'd like that too. For the first time in years, Claire allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by recovering from the past. She imagined expanding the workshop, teaching Emma furniture restoration, traveling with Daniel during summer breaks, a quiet, ordinary life. It was exactly what she'd always wanted. Her phone buzzed. A message from Richard. Only one sentence. Thad, we identified the man in the reflection. You know him, and you'll never guess who it is. Claire read Richard's message twice. We identified the man in the reflection. You know him, and you'll never guess who it is. She looked at Daniel. What is it? She handed him the phone. He frowned. Did he say who it was? No. And he texted instead of calling. Claire nodded, which means he doesn't want to say it in a message. Her phone rang almost immediately. Richard, Claire answered. Clay know who it is. I do. His voice was calm, but I'd rather tell you in person. Is it Greg? No. Ethan? No. The Claire's mind raced through dozens of former employees. I give up. Richard took a slow breath. It's David Mercer. Claire frowned. The name sounded familiar. Then it hit her. The maintenance contractor. Wes. The one who serviced equipment. Richard continued. We checked his business records. He wasn't just servicing machinery. He had access to every construction site. Claire closed her eyes. I remember him. Hardly ever spoke. Richard replied quietly. And according to our investigation, he and Greg had been business partners long before Bennett Construction hired either of them. Silence filled the room. So Greg wasn't working alone. No. Not even close. The following day, Claire, Daniel, Richard, and Deputy Sarah Mitchell met at the sheriff's office. Richard laid the evidence across a large conference table. Emily's notebook, inspection records, photographs, the anonymous notes, the tire track comparisons. Sarah added another folder. We've located David Mercer's truck. The Claire looked up. You found him. Sarah nodded. The truck was abandoned at a storage facility. And David? We're still looking. Richard folded his hands. But we've confirmed one important thing. What? The The forged inspection records began with Greg and David. Claire looked toward Ethan. He wasn't there. Where does Ethan fit into all of this? Richard answered honestly. Poor decisions. Negligence. Looking the other way. He paused. But so far, we've found no evidence that he created the forged documents. Claire let out a slow breath. He still signed contracts. Yes. He still ignored warnings. Yes. But ignoring problems and creating them, Richard nodded, are not the same thing. 2 weeks later, the investigation became public. Greg Lawson and David Mercer were named as the primary suspects in a long-running fraud involving forged inspection records and falsified safety documentation. Search warrants were issued. News stations covered the story for days. Bennett Construction suspended operations while the investigation continued. Ethan cooperated fully. He admitted that he had ignored Claire's repeated warnings years earlier. He accepted responsibility for failing to question people he trusted. The company would likely never recover. Neither would his reputation. One quiet afternoon, Ethan asked to meet Claire one last time. This time she agreed. Not because she owed him anything, because she no longer feared the conversation. They met in a small public park. Autumn had almost given way to winter. The trees stood nearly bare. Ethan looked older than his 45 years. He smiled sadly. You look happy. Claire answered honestly. I am. He nodded. I can see that. For a while they simply watched children playing nearby. Finally Ethan spoke. I spent years thinking success meant getting bigger. Claire listened. I stopped listening to the people who cared about doing things the right way. He looked down. The person I ignored most, he smiled sadly, was you. Claire didn't interrupt. I've apologized before. I know. But today I'm not asking for forgiveness. She waited. I'm thanking you. Claire looked surprised. For what? For trying. His voice cracked. You tried to protect the company. You tried to protect me. I just didn't listen. Claire felt something inside her finally settle. Not because Ethan had apologized. Because she no longer needed the apology to move forward. She smiled gently. I hope you become the man you should have been years ago. He nodded. So do I. They stood. There was no hug, no dramatic farewell. Just two people who had finally accepted that the past could not be rewritten. Only learned from. Winter arrived quietly in Ashford. Claire's workshop expanded into the neighboring barn Frank had decided to lease to her. The reading chair she had built from Harold Whittaker's sketch sat beside the fireplace in her farmhouse. It became her favorite place to read every evening. Emma's handcrafted reading bench found a permanent home in the local library. A small brass plaque read. A second built by Emma Brooks and Claire Bennett. Brooks' second. Daniel smiled every time he saw it. One Saturday morning he stood in the workshop holding a small velvet box. Claire raised an eyebrow. That looks suspicious. It probably is. She laughed. You've become much braver. I had good motivation. He walked toward her. I spent years believing my life ended when I lost my wife. The Claire's smile softened. You helped me understand something. What? Our hearts don't replace the people we've loved. They simply make room. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring. Claire Bennett. He smiled nervously. Would you build the rest of your life with me? Tears filled her eyes before she could answer. She laughed through them. You finally asked. I finally did. Yes. The word came easily. Without fear, without hesitation. Just certainty. Emma burst through the workshop door at exactly the wrong, or perhaps the perfect, moment. I knew it. Daniel laughed. You were spying. I was waiting. Rank walked in behind her carrying a pie. I told her to give you 5 more minutes. Everyone laughed. The workshop echoed with the sound. Warm. Honest. Home. Months later, Claire stood outside the expanded workshop, watching the sun set across the fields. The farmhouse no longer felt like a place she'd escaped to. It was simply home. She thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the years spent rebuilding. She realized something important. The worst day of her life had not been the end of her story. It had been the beginning of the life she was always meant to find. Sometimes losing the people who refuse to value you makes room for the people who always will. Claire smiled as Daniel called her inside for dinner. She took one last look at the workshop, then closed the door behind her. Not on the past, but on a chapter that no longer needed to be reopened. If Claire's journey meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment in her story stayed with you the most? Share it in the comments. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about resilience, second chances, and finding hope after heartbreak, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next story. Thank you for spending this journey with us.